Tom, anyway. Thank you.
Okay. We're all set there? Okay. And I will call the meeting to order. We have a quorum of the Selectmen. So the Valentine's Day 2019 meeting at 6:40.
6:40.
So here we are. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Nice of everyone to be here on Valentine's Day.
Wouldn't miss it. David is either joining us late or not making it. I forget which, but he said at a minimum he'd be late.
Okay. And John will not be here. So we have what we have. So Peter, do you have an order that you'd want to
Sure.
do this in? And we have an agenda, but it's kind of broad, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of broad.
Budget discussion.
Right, yeah, so everybody has a kind of mini packet in front of them. I'll start with what's on top. So that's the full roll-up. Yeah, it's on top.
Oh, I put it on back there, so it's in the back of yours. Sorry. Assuming.
So we tried to, for the purposes of the discussion tonight, change the format a little bit so that everybody was a little
Confused?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
So it was,
sorry.
nope, not trying to make it more
Having a long
confused.
week, sorry.
Trying to make it easier to decipher. So the FY20 submitted line includes the funding for capital, for the staffing, expense, and compensation adjustment increases that we have been talking about being in the mix since December. But then the FY20 adjusted backs those items out that we simply at this point can't afford to fund within our Article 1 levy limit budget. So, and you can see the delta between the two is that middle column, increase, decrease, and then the last two columns on the right are a dollar change from FY19 budget to FY20 adjusted, and then percentage change for the same.
And this note on the bottom about the school budget?
So it includes, obviously the school committee met last night. This budget includes the budget as was approved last night with level services and OPEB and the SRO, which is the same number that the superintendent originally recommended back in mid-December.
Okay.
So I'm going to go over a couple, sorry, go ahead.
I'm not confused. I just want to be clear. So the this number 19.683, the FY20 adjusted,
Yep.
that does not include capital or the request for increasing staffing. Is that, did I hear that correctly from you as you went through that?
Yes, that is correct.
So that's outside of that 19.6.
Yep. The, just go through the first page really quick, because there have been a couple adjustments made there. One thing just to note, in that top section that sets the levy limit, we added in a couple new lines there so that it was very clear in terms of how we made the transition from the FY19 levy limit up to FY20. So in addition to the projected new growth line that we've always, or the budgeted new growth line that we've always kind of kept right under the 2.5% increase, we added the difference between what was budgeted for 19 in particular and what our actual new growth was. So we budgeted $100,000 in new growth. Our actual new growth was $287,000. So we called that out specifically so that that could be seen. And then last year, same for the school operating override. We created a new line, showed that operating override, the $331,000 in FY19. So that it's not just built into the formula, you can very explicitly see how it all ties together. And then had a conversation as well with the finance team around two things. One, the FY20 new growth, and the other, the reserve for abatement. So new growth, for, you know, FY19 in particular, we were up just under 300,000, 287,000. The year before that, we were, I believe, over 220,000, and before that, I think it was 208. So we've been pretty consistently up 200,000+, and especially last year. And you know, we obviously have a couple major developments coming online. We've captured a very limited amount of new growth from that just when they were starting last year. But for next year, you know, talking to Steve Ozahowski, he felt confident that increasing that number by $20,000 was still conservative enough and a fair representation of kind of the floor of what we can expect for FY20. So we've bumped that up $20,000. The offset for that,
Yeah, of course.
unfortunately, is another item that we've included in your packet. It's the clause 41C1/2.
Oh, yeah,
So
I wondered
this
what
is,
that was.
This is more of a reminder than anything else. This local option was on the warrant at town meeting last spring. It was approved by town meeting, which means it then is placed on the ballot this coming April, and if it's approved at the ballot, it would then go into effect for FY20. So what this is right now, the senior circuit tax benefit or exemption, as currently constituted, has a very low income eligibility threshold, so $20,000 for single, $30,000 for married, and there's a fixed $1,000 exemption amount. And generally, historically, we have seen about 8, 10, 12 residents take advantage of it. So the state reimburses us $4,000 for that, so the net cost year over year that we budget for in the overlay is $8,000. For this new program, it significantly bumps up the income limit, so $57,000 for single, $86,000 for married. There's no asset limit, and so it's going to greatly expand that pool. And it's essentially going to mirror the state's senior circuit breaker program in terms of eligibility standards and so forth. We also, as part of the vote at town meeting and on the ballot measure, have reduced the eligibility age from 70 to 65, which was at our option. You have to have owned for 5 years consecutively. You have to have lived 10 years in Massachusetts as well. But when we look back historically, over the past 5 to 8 years, to try to project out what the cost impact will be for us, and then if this goes into effect, generally what we've seen is anywhere from 75 to 90 residents apply for and qualify for this benefit at the state level. And the abatement amount, or excuse me, exemption amount, has been basically somewhere in the $70,000 range. 70 on the low end, $80,000 on the high end.
Was any of that as part of your adjustments, or this is just, we'll wait and see?
What's that?
Or
Yeah, so this then ties into increasing the overlay. So we've projected out, we've said, assuming 85 residents apply and are eligible, and assuming that the average resident who applies and is eligible, their home is 90% of the median home value of $574,000. And based on our current tax rate and so forth, the net increase or net cost impact of this program on the overlay is $75,000, which is $67,000 more than we've accounted for historically.
Mm.
So, with that in mind, and also knowing that these are just estimates, I mean, they're pretty well-educated guesses, but who knows when we actually roll out the program, who applies, and what their home values are, and so forth. So what we've done is, earlier on in the budget process, the reserve for abatement has historically been funded at $137,000. We had proposed bumping it up to $175,000, so a $40,000 increase to account for this difference, with the idea that the overlay now is one big bucket. It's not separate years. So whatever's left over from last year rolls forward. And so we thought there might be some ability to use, some overlay that hadn't been used this year in the next year and cover some of those costs if they came in high. But ultimately, because of the fact that it's a reval year, we just went through the measuring lists project. Abatement applications this year are a lot higher than they've been historically. And so we're not at this point anticipating any, or at least not budgeting any residual balance being carried over from this fiscal year to next. So the net result of that is an increase in the reserve for abatement from the 175 that we had initially proposed to 195. So it's a $60,000 increase in the abatement line from 135 this year and what it's been historically up to 195.
Coincidental then on the 20,000 offset,
It was part of the same conversation. But yeah.
but not directly related.
No, not directly related,
Right.
but also recognizing that we're pretty far along in the budget process, and we knew that, we had been probably a little overly conservative on the net, or on the new growth number. And
We do our
recognize
budget.
kind of the trickle-down effects of $20,000 one way or the other,
Right.
pretty significant at this point in the process.
Yep, of course. This all makes sense to me.
So a little more conservative on one end and still working within parameters that we feel comfortable with on the other. If that makes sense.
Mhm.
So that's the first page. You'll notice the bottom line on the very last page. I saw Catherine turning to it out of the gate.
Oh, no, he knows me
I
too
don't
well.
think you were alone in that one.
Yeah.
So
That's the bottom
the number's
line.
gonna look a little different. Basically what it's saying here is the school operating override would be 508,000 instead of the 559 number that we've been talking about.
Right.
That's because of really two things. One, once we started backing everything out, of the proposed personnel and expense changes, we realized that we hadn't been backing out the $32,000 of employee benefits from the health insurance line that would go along with those full-time positions if we move forward with them. And then there was another capital item, the dehumidifier, that we had kind of taken off the table early in the process of the dehumidifier for the clerk's office, that we'd taken off the table midstream in the process and hadn't backed that out either. So that's really how we end up now with funding. I guess you could, the way you could look at it is we're including $51,000 more of the increase in the school assessment in our Article 1 budget. The flip side of that is that we could, depending on how the conversation goes tonight, look at those priority items, and we've got $50,000 more to work with there without, increasing the amount that the schools anticipate the operating overlay. So that's what's different on the roll-up sheet. Next item in your packet, sorry.
Sorry, quick question, just just to jump back briefly to new growth. You'd said over the past few years it had been in the 200 plus, I mean, I know it was 287 last year.
So 17, 18, and 19, or sorry, 17, 18, and 19.
Yeah.
I get that. It's been over 200,000. The 287 was the highest it's been, but
Yep.
it's, I think it was 208, and in 17, 18 was around 220, 230.
So the 9337 and 100,000 for FY 17-18 respectively.
So, yeah, so we didn't go back and do those adjustments on this sheet
Okay.
for the purposes of tonight's discussion, but we're working on it.
Okay, thanks. I just
Yeah.
wanted to.
Yeah, it's again embedded in the formula. In the interest of having the conversation specifically around FY 20,
In
we
comparison
wanted to call it out,
Call in that 19 growth.
but,
Yeah.
but that sheet
Okay.
will be updated to
That's-
include that.
Thank you.
But totally the right thing to do. It's, again, in the formula, but not on the sheet.
Yep.
Okay, so the next thing in your packet should look familiar. It's the school budget. Nothing has changed. I don't know, Alex, if you want to speak to the fact that you were at the school committee
interested
meeting
to-
last night where
Yep.
the budget was approved.
So they approved the budget. They had a little bit of, Jim was there as well. Had a little bit of discussion about the two above level services items of OPEB and SRO. It felt like, I think they took an initial vote and didn't have support for it, and then had a couple of motions
We got an amended motion.
to amend it, right, a couple of motions to basically, one was to strike SRO effectively, and replace it with like a notional dollar.
$1
as a
placeholder.
placeholder, basically, right. That, it sounded like that motion failed, and then, or that motion failed, and then so did the subsequent motion, which was to cut OPEB maybe in half.
50%, 125, that was the
Right.
suggestion, right?
So, they did take a vote before those two motions, right, on the budget, or no?
No, they took the the final vote on the total after those amendments
Only
failed.
after, right, so
Both of the amendments
both amendments
didn't
failed.
pass,
Right,
I think, on a 5-2 vote, I think. something like
right,
that.
something like that, and then it came down to one vote, and it's kind of unceremoniously passed with not a whole lot of discussion about, certainly the big picture, I mean, the bulk, the lion's share of the budget wasn't really discussed at all. They did discuss those options on OPEB
Yep.
and SRO.
Were there any members of the public there commenting? It was a public,
Gary was
Right.
there, Jim was there, there was,
but
some public,
say anything?
no, one, community resident who I think might have been Hamilton expressed support for SRO.
Yeah.
There was an email campaign in support of the SROs also. It came through my
Oh.
email.
The feelers went out for,
Yeah, I know a bunch of emails were sent to school committee,
yeah,
which you may not have seen at the public hearing, but there was an email campaign to the school committee supporting the SRO.
sure, sure.
But not regarding who funded it, just that there's an SRO.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think the focus was on the
on the position.
position itself and the perceived benefit to those folks who were in strong support of it, but less so on certainly in the funding of it. And I raised that question about, whether or not, how it would play out with Hamilton versus the town of Hamilton versus the regional school district as an operating item, and just kind of didn't really go anywhere.
And no discussion of the, I guess I'd call it a reduction or cut sheet that was proposed or looked at, not proposed
Yeah,
even.
1.3 million, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was,
That was not raised,
Hmm.
right? The list of potential cuts, right,
Yeah.
right.
That wasn't even brought up, I don't think.
No, that was not brought up or in the presentation. The presentation was what we, for the most part, I think
seen
what we've
three
seen
times
before,
now.
without maybe a couple of detail sheets on.
So all those detail sheets would be available publicly, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So they're all in
That
the,
1.3 million cut wasn't just, that's a public.
Yeah, it was in the packet
It's in the packet.
several meetings ago now.
Yep.
I don't think it's on the, where they are keeping all their budget documents, but
No.
it definitely is in
Okay.
one of
Right,
Yeah.
the,
right.
And-
the school committee back.
I don't think even the night that it was in the packet, I don't think they've had any deliberation about it, maybe other than to say, okay. But
Right.
they didn't accept any of those.
I think there was some discussion of it that night.
That
at the
night,
meeting,
but-
yeah.
I don't think there was a
I don't
full vote.
think, there was no support for those reductions by the school committee.
Okay.
Certainly
Didn't hear any of
that'd be
them.
unpopular to say the least. I mean, there were,
I think they put them out there just to make a point. 1.3 million equates to these kind of reductions and these kinds of
Yeah.
changes in services in the school system.
Well, what I guess I was wondering is now that they know that there's a potential, probable, likely override for the schools because of our budget, if they would pull that sheet out again and said, if the override fails, these are the things that the district would lose. I didn't know if they would do that.
I don't think they wanted to play that
No.
approach but the other night.
that's fair, yeah.
I think they just wanted to keep it,
Yeah.
this is the budget, this is what we're proposing, and
Yeah, there was a lot of kind of back and forth, not so constructive, kind of posturing as to how the override is titled.
I'm sure.
You know, you're calling it a school override, you're only giving us 135,000. I think we're actually giving in the order of 10 million.
Increase, huh?
But of the increase, there's that kind of strong focus on that.
Did they poke at you for the override?
did they what?
Did they poke in terms of?
I don't know about that. I mean, I don't take any of this personally. I don't think it's a philosophical matter. Others might, but no, it's a fair question. Sorry, but it's definitely, you know, defensive posturing. I think in light of the, you know, I tried to emphasize it was a very similar structure, most likely, and I went further than saying possible or likely. I pretty much
Yeah, I know, I'm
where we're
trying
at, with the exception of this discussion that
Yeah.
we're going to have in a very brief and not terribly articulate update that I delivered, and then with regard to the structure, kind of similar. The dollar amount is increased, the magnitude is greater, but there is kind of a focus of the amount that we're funding under our levy limit. As being smaller, and of course it's smaller because of the disproportionate consumption of our levy capacity by the large school operating budget. When half increases at 5+% or 7 to the town, that's obviously that's why we're here.
Okay.
So the next item in the packet, probably where there's gonna be a little bit more discussion, deliberation.
Yeah, maybe, hopefully.
So I sent this around last week, I believe, maybe it was earlier this week,
Yep.
losing track of it a little bit.
Thank you.
After the finance committee meeting, where these above level service items were discussed, and
I'd love
and he went through all of them one by one, came to a consensus position, and that's reflected in the sheet. You can see the same on the Board of Selectmen side. So what I tried to do is put them side by side where everybody was on the same page. We have a consensus ranking, low, medium, high, or some hybrid of those combinations. Where there were different positions, I left a couple question marks, and I think those will probably be where much of the discussion will end up tonight. I will say that for right now, the expectation is that items that are either high or medium high will probably be the ones that kind of make the cut in terms of, given our available funding and the extent to which we've already kind of pushed a fair amount of this onto a school operating override and our budget capacity. That's kind of where I'm expecting, not necessarily dictating, but just kind of where I'm expecting the discussion to go. Right now, there are 3 items which both the Select Board and Finance Committee agree on as being high priority. Those are increasing staffing in the Finance Office, and 2 capital items for the Fire Department, the protective gear and the air packs. So those 3 items together total $45,000. The one note I will make on the finance position, Patty can certainly speak to it too, but if you, kind of after the finance committee meeting last week, and recognizing that there seemed to be some support for increasing the hours, at the same time, there was a fair amount of discussion around making those compensation adjustments for the town clerk staff and council on aging staff. And where we kind of came out of that philosophically was we were hoping that kind of all three of those things would be tied together. Hard to increase hours in the finance office and not adjust compensation for staff who've been here for a number of years up to a place where we feel comfortable, especially given where they are relative to the minimum wage and internal and external comps, and we've had all those conversations. So in the spirit of that, Patty and Diana and I met earlier this week and are now proposing kind of a two-step increase in the hours in the finance office and a two-step increase to the administrative assistant to the town clerk, such that basically the finance assistant would go from 30 hours to 33 hours in FY20 and then would hopefully get increased up to 36 and a half in FY21. So where that item had previously cost about $8,500, it's now projected to have an FY20 cost impact of $4,100. And similarly with the administrative assistant to the town clerk, where that was set to go from just under $16 an hour all the way up to $23.50 an hour. What we're proposing is to take that to $21.50 in FY20 and increase it up to the $23.50 in '21. So those two together essentially actually come in a little less than what had been budgeted or forecast for the full increase of the finance position to 36 and a half hours a week.
So if I have this right, if we were to add those three staffing changes, we'd be adding about $13,000 to the
Correct.
budget. That math I could actually do. Four.
Does Diane think the person will stay with the step approach?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, she'd talk to the individual,
Okay.
and I think that our proposal would, work in terms of,
Keeping?
yeah.
Yep, thank you.
So it's 54,000?
So far. So far, that's what it sounds like. But there were a few other question mark.
Yes, 54, yep.
I don't know if the Board of Selectmen has talked about these publicly or not, or if you just kind of conveyed general.
We have not deliberated.
Or directly.
We've
Yeah.
all three of us, at least one of us, at least two of us, have filled out Peter's grid and ranked things low, medium, high, et cetera. And Peter's amalgamated those for us.
Right.
But I
Which is
think
good.
that we didn't publicly discuss our collective gradations of this. Is that a fair statement, Peter?
Yep.
Thank you.
That's just, if I can make a general comment about our approach, because you've had your share of hours at the table here too, so
Yeah.
you may not have had all the afforded time to watch our.
No,
2
I
hours.
personally would appreciate hearing your
I just figured I'd give a quick
rationale and
kind of
summary on-
summarize of
yeah,
first how we
totally.
approached it,
Please
Yeah.
do.
and then obviously we're here to discuss in more detail as warranted any of the items or all of them, what have you. So we met at, was it last week?
Yep.
For this one in particular? We were over at Bucher. And basically, so we had full representation of FinCom and Patty and Peter. And so we looked at each of these and basically jumped into them, and anyone who wanted to comment and, ask questions which were clarified, and kind of give our suggestions, obviously, as to relative priority to the town in isolation with some kind of contextual overlay for the whole budget implications. And the way I tried to think of it is just like, where do we run? Well, first of all of the rationale and requests, I think most would argue were well presented, well put together. They, they represented, thoughtful, for the most part, pretty reasonable asks. So obviously, we're not saying, no, this is not justified in any way, shape, or form, but obviously, we've got the levy limit issue. So I think the question then became,
Affordability.
say again, sorry?
Affordability.
Affordability, and also what risk do we run of, not financial hardship, but, financial risk in continuing to defer the costs. I think one example is infrastructure. If it's in dire need and you punt, do you have to have a more expensive repair, replacement? Things along those lines, not that it's even really specific to one. And then, of course, there were some that were kind of easier, namely public safety equipment and the like, that we didn't spend a whole lot of time on. We were more or less in the same kind of temp of the room, as Peter put it, with these things, but I think I'll speak for myself. I could probably be swayed, one way or another to some degree. I don't think any of us were pounding the table adamant about them, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that singular column of FinCom priority ranking includes our collective feedback without too much in the way of outliers that were, well, you're the minority vote for this, saying no way, and the rest of us are saying aye. It's pretty, if not uniform, pretty consensus,
general
right?
consensus.
Yeah,
Yep.
there was general consensus.
Are there any that, so, I mean, if we,
One thing that's
yeah,
not
go
on
ahead.
here that I think we spent a lot of time talking about was the loose leaf pickup.
Oh, no, it's in there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's there.
It's
We're
kind
getting there.
of,
We got a whole nother,
Where is
back in,
it?
it's under the full-time driver operator for
which
DPW.
was actually, I think, probably a good place
I'm
to
not seeing
start.
it.
I mean, we had
So I
several.
think that's gonna be an extensive conversation.
That's true.
I don't know
Well-
if we wanna talk about
Oh,
anything.
got it.
It seems as
This
if,
one.
based on what you said and what we see here, there are, as we said, several things that we all rated high.
Yeah.
So my suggestion would be, let's not spend a lot of time talking about those. We may not put them in, but we sort of all agree. And then there were some a couple that we rated differently. And I, for one, would be interested to hear the rationale, for instance, why you might have rated something medium and we rated it high.
Sure.
And I guess the first one that jumped out at me was the full-time
it's the
driver
first one on the
operator.
list.
However, yeah.
And I get that it's a big discussion, but it might be one of the more critical discussions that we have.
One of my, not concerns, but one of my expressions of how to approach the hourly, which I think the hourly increases, you got to do that across all the positions. That was my concern, that if we didn't do it across all the positions, then we'd be in a little bit of a vulnerable position of treating one department differently than another department for the same job functions and essentially the same job descriptions.
So I think on that point, that was where with the BOS, if you just jumping down to compensation adjustments, the administrative assistant to the town clerk for the BOS was a low to medium, but for the COA was a high. And the finance committee, in talking around that issue, said that if we're gonna make those kinds of adjustments, that they should all kind of be grouped together.
So I think I agree with you, Jim, in general, but I think that since we did our wage matrix 3 years ago now,
Yep.
and I'm not sure that we've updated, but since we did, at the time that we did that, we recognized that there were some positions that needed to be adjusted, that we could in a budget cycle. And there've been others that we didn't or couldn't adjust in that particular budget cycle. And it sounds like some, maybe we weren't even really aware, were not within a market.
Where they should be.
Well,
Right.
yeah, that was part of our discussion with the
Right.
finance committee,
Right.
was basically none of these positions were looked at as
Right.
part of that.
Right.
These were kind
Off
of
the
the.
radar.
And so that's why they,
Less than 19-hour a week,
right,
part-time,
right,
and so just, we didn't have the comps,
right.
didn't even look at them.
So it does make sense, though, if we have 3 similar positions, none of which were on the original, they're all, we think, under market. It's not inconsistent with our past actions to act on them.
I also appreciate the pencil sharpening to consider the step increase.
Totally.
Especially where, and I had made this comment, feeling a little bad doing so, about the the percentage increase
Yeah.
that results from bringing to market is large, and of course, it could play out different ways, but seeing the step increase to the extent it shows a good faith effort on the town's part to bring this in line over a reasonable timeframe.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, that was part of our takeaway too,
Right.
why we ended up where we did.
So does that kind of suggest then that for those three that we're all viewing them similarly?
I think so.
Oh,
Yeah, I think
okay.
we are. I think they're, sort of, they rise to the maybe up. And when we get done with this chart, we may find that there are 5 things that we think we really need, but we can't afford them. So we're gonna have to
and
figure that out.
Great
but-
point. So for the purposes of our discussion this evening, this isn't final.
Right, this is sort of
This is just
what
our
we,
first
Final.
collective
Final.
discussion.
Sort of final.
which has to be final by sort of next week.
Past this
2
other
weeks,
weekend.
2 weeks,
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Not triple final, just double.
Yeah.
Double final.
No, just with the, I think it's important to look at each one individually on its merits,
Yeah.
but ultimately,
They're related.
they're related to the budget.
So,
Now, can we talk about?
sure, now let's talk about, let's leave pickup.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think it's probably best just to go kind of sequentially with the question marks, where the BOS and Finance Committee differ.
Okay.
And that first one is the new full-time driver operator.
Yep.
And just to frame the discussion, I think it was helpful when we were talking about it with the Finance Committee. There are really 3 options. The first is to transition from loose leaf pickup to bag leaf pickup. And the net projected savings from doing that is around $40,000, because we would be able to do a fair amount of the new stormwater compliance in-house instead of subbing it out to Weston and Sampson, which is currently budgeted at $50,000 in the budget right now. About $40,000 of that, the DPW would be able to do in terms of the collections and sampling from outfalls and catch basins and so forth. So that would be a net savings of $40,000. Or we could have Weston and Sampson continue to do the stormwater compliance at $50,000 a year. We could keep loose leaf pickup exactly as it is and not add a new staff position to the DPW, which is a cost of, would be at a cost of $50,000 plus benefits, so 67 all rolled up. And that would essentially be where we are right now. That's what's funded in the budget as presented. Or you could keep loose leaf pickup and add the new driver operator, which would actually increase the budget by $67,000. And that's what Bill is asking for if we continue with loose leaf pickup based on the workload of the department.
So if we were to keep loose leaf pickup, make sure I understood this, but did not add any staff, we'd be increasing the budget by 67,000. Well,
Nope.
that would be that's actually the budget
That's the budget
that's
now.
here.
That's the budget that's there. That's option 2.
If we decided to keep loose leaf pickup and add a new staff member
Correct.
that he's recommending,
All in is $67,000.
is a plus 67. And that would assume, since they're doing loose leaf pickup, that Weston and Sampson would still be doing the stormwater?
Correct. Which is what we budgeted at the $50,000.
Which is already in the budget.
Right.
The
So it-
50,000 and the,
Yeah, and the $40,000 is actually a net, because there's $40,000 of savings on the stormwater side. There's an additional probably $12,000 to $15,000 in saving and expenses between the cost of fuel, repairs to the leaf vac truck, and some subcontracting work that we have to do at the DPW. But then there's the cost of bagged leaf pickup by Casella,
right.
which is again about $13,000. Those 2 things net out, but the savings would be really on the stormwater compliance, $40,000.
It feels like this, for Bill, anyway, for our DPW head, not for Bill, is bigger than just let me rephrase that. It feels as if he thinks this time it's really important to hire a person, or I guess not hire a person, but not do loose leaf pickup. So he's trying to save money by saying, let's not do loose leaf pickup. And you know, that, I think he prefers to be able to do our own in-house stormwater compliance stuff and give up loose leaf pickup.
Which is about $110,000 different. You know, from what he's asking for, ideally, if we do stay with loose leaf pickup versus what it would cost.
Savings plus the ask.
Yeah. Well, you know, he mentions that, how many times has this come up? Three attempts before to end loose leaf collection. I think some of us were probably at all three of those town meetings. The savings was never this substantial or concrete, I don't think. The last number I remember is, you know, $35,000. If that was it, we either do loose leaf and it costs 35, or we don't and it saves 35. And people at town meeting thought, well, let's see, you know, $35,000 divided by this many houses, what is that going to cost me, really? I love loose leaf pickup. I feel like the argument is a little more compelling this year.
Yeah, with stormwater compliance rolling on to our requirements of required expenses, it's 50,000 that Bill has said he thought they could do a big chunk in-house.
Yeah.
Plus, I can't remember whether there was a dollar assigned to it, but there would be reduced contractual costs. I remember him talking about the sidewalk repair, patching the roads, the tarring of the roads that have been contracted out this year because of manpower challenges.
Stuff they'd rather do.
Stuff that they rather and can do, is my understanding.
Crack ceiling
and
painting.
painting.
Sub out this year for the
Painting
first time.
sidewalks.
So there wasn't a dollar amount put to that, but there is a dollar amount associated with it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So the devil's advocate position on that, though, would be, okay, yeah, that was this year. That was an aberration. That typically, we've done loose leaf pickup and not had to sub those things out. We had a really unusual year with snow and rain and early, and so that would be and I'm not saying that's necessarily my position, but I think that I hear that as a counter argument to that point, subbing things out.
I wonder if there's other issues that will come up, you know, that they would have to contract out for. It's, you know, and if they didn't have the manpower to do it, whether it was road repair or sidewalks or something. I mean, from Bill's argument, it seems to me that he's really saying, look, I can make my resources go a lot further if I don't have to do the loose leaf pickup.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
that's my basic,
Yeah.
never mind the $40,000 and the $67,000
It's a
position.
pain in the ass, according to him, right?
I think the one thing makes it a little complicated, and I'm not sure how
Citizens love
the discussion article line item was structured the last time around. But if we were to say, move forward and go to bag leaf pickup instead of loose leaf pickup, and then we would be, and doing the stormwater, majority of the stormwater work in-house, and reducing that expense line by $40,000, and it went to town meeting. The town meeting doesn't have the ability to increase an appropriation.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, they do,
Yes,
don't
they
they?
do.
Yeah,
But they have
not
to
for the,
find- But they have to
Yeah.
find an offsetting.
right, right.
Correct.
So picture that.
So what I'm saying, right,
The TA salary,
So
for example.
picture that.
Sure.
No.
so play it out.
Yeah.
If there's a, you know,
Backlash.
we can't let this go. We have to find
Yes,
money for
right,
it
right.
somewhere else. Then there's $40,000 that has to be found somewhere else, and
Right, right.
we all know that there isn't a $40,000 cushion anywhere.
Yeah. Can I ask a quick question about how did it come up? Because I thought I heard that, like, on what basis? I mean, it was proposed that we do away with it and obviously not have loose leaf, but like, it wasn't a warrant article. What
I feel
was
like
it?
it was a separate line item in the
Oh, yeah,
budget,
and.
right?
And
Yeah.
I'm not surprised to
We
hear
might
that
have
there
both
was
been on the
a-
FinCom at the same time, I'm not sure.
It was a very contentious discussion, that
Yeah.
there was overwhelming
So-
support.
But I think it was a
Not
staff
surprised.
position that was
I love
funded
it
in the
too.
budget, and there was a motion to cut that funding, and cutting that funding would have resulted in loose leaf.
The one
It was a
time I
person.
remember,
It was a person.
but it
was a
was
person.
not I don't think that the change was contemplated on town meeting floor. I think we went to town meetings with that change, specifically to gauge whether this was something important, at least my recollection. Okay, guys, if you want this, it's this much. Whether it might have been a staff person, I don't know. But,
They assigned a person to it.
right, for 35,000.
That's
And
something.
said this
I'm pretty
would go
sure
away.
that there wasn't an operating override
Oh,
in the
no.
mix, and bumping
no.
up against the levy limit at the
No, it
same
wasn't.
time.
Oh, no, not at
No.
all.
Right, yeah, so it's a
So
complicating
it's-
factor
yeah.
now.
It is,
that we
yeah.
So
didn't
what's
that
the
much
answer then,
trickier.
though? I mean, I think this is a little complicated. The nuance of the savings is not easily put into buckets. And so therefore, there's a higher risk that people won't understand it, and sometimes when they don't understand it, they don't vote for it. What would we do?
Well, I think it's actually, I mean, on the savings versus expense is actually pretty straightforward in terms of being able to show it. Not that it
know.
would be an easy argument.
No, I just don't think it is that straightforward, because we're not just talking as we were, here's a person, loose leaf, bagged. We're
Yeah.
talking the combination of stormwater, loose leaf versus bagged, a person, I mean, you just gave me gave us 4 scenarios, I had to write them down,
Yep.
so I could keep track of them. So it's, I'm just sensitive to the fact that the more complicated it is, the harder it is to sell.
I guess I am also looking at it in the context of we're coming up the second year in a row with an override proposal, and I am comfortable going with the option to move to bag leaf pickup. So we can show, it's something that's clear cut, we're doing a good faith effort to find as much savings as possible.
Right. And I agree with that
And
position,
so,
actually.
I do too. I agree with that. We have to show the people, look, we're not just,
Right.
that's the way it goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
and, I also thought about who does this impact by getting rid of loose leaf pickup? And, I thought, well, maybe if you're elderly, you might have more of a challenge putting stuff in the bags. But maybe a lot of people who wouldn't want to put them in bags are already hiring someone to get them to the front of the road for loose leaf pickup anyway. I don't know, I don't have a good sense of that.
No,
But I also have lived in multiple different places over the course of my lifetime and have never had
Oh,
any
absolutely.
kind of loop pick.
But you have to have lived
Well,
through
you
one
live in
town,
Wenham now, so
you
go.
have to have lived through one town meeting where this issue, and all I'm
yes.
saying, it was,
Yeah.
it's kind of like the clock, the smallest item that people see a service that they get is the one that we could talk about for an hour, and we've got bigger things to talk about. So I'm just
Right.
suggesting that we figure out if this conversation should happen, and if this is something that people are going to not want, how would we compensate? What
Isn't
would
it
we
still
do?
a fair assessment from Bill? So you add, just go down the path, if you add the full-time driver. Still, but he's still saying this is a lot of work. He'd still prefer not to do it.
You mean even if he adds the position?
Because you
Yes,
still
yes,
got,
Yes.
because you still
Yes.
get your capital, all your machine is starting to break and everything else.
Yeah, and even
His
by,
words, what he
even in
said.
adding, the problem with adding the staff is it does just keep up with the status quo. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
Right.
that he can then take on
additional.
any of
Yeah,
really the
no.
stormwater
I
work,
didn't think
because coincidentally, that collection and sampling takes place mainly in November and December,
Right.
which is
And
when they're
timing's
doing
bad.
this.
Mhm.
So,
The timing is
so it doesn't
Yep.
help
I-
with that.
I also appreciate DPW's position on this and how much, in the 2 years I've been in FinCom and paying close attention to this, how much effort they put into trying to do stuff in-house, keep things running efficiently, keep things running for a long time, with, a good value for our dollars spent on it.
Absolutely. And not to say that other departments do this, but
Oh, yeah.
if you hear something
Talk
from,
about it, yeah.
from DPW, it's usually a conservative
Yep.
complaint. I'll call
So
it that.
what food for thought, why wouldn't, or could Bill explain it?
Yeah, I
Would
think,
it have more?
I'm sure he'd be there.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
don't
you're
know
saying a
that-
town
Yeah, at the
meeting, yeah.
time.
Oh,
He
okay.
could certainly be there, and I think we'd have to kind of
We could also
strategize about
explain
I
it,
don't
yeah.
think that
Who
would
would wanna
be,
present?
right. Bill is just gonna mumble.
okay.
Yeah, he's very accommodating with the services that he provides, not only those that his department is tasked with providing, but I think, to your point, this is, he said 8 weeks, it's his whole crew. And to put it in context, and I wanna go on record saying, I love the loose leaf
Yeah, yeah.
everything pickup.
Oh,
I'm a-
Well, actually, I don't use it.
What am I in that regard? I love it. But if it was $10,000 that we were saving, and I think we all know that there are a lot of people, a lot of residents who share the same feelings, and would just say, no, it's worth it at the end of the day, sort of the quick hit math.
Yes, but they would.
There will be, but it's 100,000+ when we are scrambling, and we run the risk if we don't at least propose it, and whatever, take the next steps and trying to figure out if it's gonna
Right.
blow up in our faces
Right.
with flaming rakes.
Right.
Get it.
I love that
Chased out
visual.
with rakes.
That's
So-
such a great visual.
I have my own stable, I got old pitchforks, but if we don't at least
Agree.
not only consider it, but basically
Propose it.
make it a high priority and propose it, then we run the risk of others saying, well, you said no to all these things, and we have a large operating override for X 100,000 for the schools, but you prioritize leaves at 100 grand,
Right,
right, at that point,
Right.
because of the
Absolutely.
quirky scenario that we're in with those
Right.
offsets.
absolutely.
So we need an alternative if it fails. So
Yeah,
Yes.
that was all, only
you guys
where
said
I was
just
going.
might fail.
Not to at all say it shouldn't be.
Coming, did you?
What we're saying, I think, of these options is
How
that,
good are you guys got raking leaves?
yeah, right. And if
Very
it
good.
fails, the FinCom will be out to rake your leaves. Just add that to the job description. There you go. We'll give you a stipend. So like, about the size of
No
ours.
stipends, no stipends. No stipends.
So of these options that I think we're leaning towards, right, it's the no loose leaf collection, Weston and Sampson taking over $40,000 worth of Weston and Sampson work, and a new staff member?
No.
No
No.
new staff
No
member.
new staff.
And avoiding
Because
that
we don't need
cost.
the new capacity
So we
for
don't need it,
staff,
Right.
since
So
we're gonna
that's,
get rid of loose leaf.
$40,000 reduction in the DPW, I mean, the net impact is a
A
$40,000
reduction in
in the
DPW
DPW
line.
expense line.
Okay.
And could you just quickly, again, go through those line items? When, like 10 minutes ago, you said these are the, what gives you the net 40?
The components of it.
Yeah, I didn't get them all written down.
Yeah, see,
I'm-
she
I'm
has to write them down
envisioning-
too.
I'm envisioning being asked this question.
Exactly
so
right.
we need
So
to
you're
answer
right.
at town meeting.
Oh, there will definitely be
Oh,
a slide
there-
prepared. You
I
can,
need an answer.
you probably might, there
But
might even be
you know,
two.
you want to think about, you want to like mull it for a few weeks before you have to explain it.
Yeah, so I'll certainly, it is contained in Bill's memo, but not very succinctly. I think, basically, it's a $40,000 reduction
Net savings.
in stormwater expense that we would not be subbing out to Weston and Sampson. It is a $13,000 increase in bag leaf pickup, which would be in our refuse line with Casella. That's 2 rounds of bag leaf pickup. And then about $13,000 in savings from
Health
maintenance and
benefits.
repair of the vac truck, the cost of diesel,
Diesel fuel.
and cemetery and Pingree Park cleanup that we sub out now, about $4,500 for that, just because at the same time that
Yeah.
the crews are doing the leaf pickup, we
Yeah.
need to clean that up, and it's Bill and one other person that can't clean up Pingree Park by themselves. So, that's how you get to those two really are offset,
Mhm.
and then the savings is in the stormwater.
So it's really 40,000. I mean, we consider the max differential of 107. Because theoretically, we could keep the leaf service, not hire another laborer.
Right.
Good.
And we're +6 or something like that in that case, or whatever. Forget what it was.
No, that's
Or
as
even
budgeted
Steven,
right now.
That's even. That's
That's
at
even.
budget.
Yeah.
So we could theoretically keep it,
You're good,
no additional cost.
even though Bill has said.
Bill has said it's not really a great solution.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
But
But we could certainly do that. It's at minimum of $40,000 savings, at maximum of $110,000 savings.
right, arguably doing what's right
Yeah.
at some point and hiring that person to help out, should we keep with the service. And then the last thing I guess I'll say is it's not permanent, right? I mean, there's nothing to say that we couldn't go
Add it back in?
Add it back in at some point, yeah, I know, I hate even saying.
Yeah,
hate
because
even saying it, but-
and have you ever seen that happen?
No, it doesn't.
No.
I know,
But you're right, I mean, technically, it's
technically,
true.
but it would be out.
If it was a catastrophe, or if they, I really more maybe likely, if they realized they could not do the Weston Sampson work. That would be probably more compelling than
Yeah, although
leaf. We
I think
really want leaf.
That'd be
There's
a
more of a
problem.
chance that it gets cut and added back in, than something would be added and then cut, right? I mean, that's, right, like if we were adding a
Exactly.
service, we know it would be nearly impossible to
To take
back that
out.
out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where if you're taking something away, you know.
You could-
The service would be easy to add back.
That's what I mean.
To agree around the table to add in dollars that we had taken out because we needed to,
Yep.
that's the harder
Well,
part.
from a simplistic point of view, you just have your answer.
Just have what?
You have your answer. Here's your alternative. Sure, keep it. There's no up. So you keep the bag, unless I misunderstood. Keep continuing the bagging loose leaf collection. No additional cost.
Will that,
Right.
an option?
Yeah.
Right, well, there you go. I'm at
But
time. Yep.
that's what people are going to complain about.
Yep. It's no additional cost. Why cut it?
Yeah,
Thank you
Right.
very much.
right. Right.
Exactly, that is the answer to
Yep.
the opposing side of, hey, it's worth 40,000 in savings.
Right.
That's not your speech on town floor, though. right?
Please let us know, please.
Well, that's why it's going to be
Let's keep it
having this
simple.
conversation, because we have to
And-
anticipate.
Whoa,
And-
and
right.
you did, by the way.
And I think, you know, if that is the way we are gonna go, then
Ugh.
we do have to, figure out what that means in terms of building some contingency for that into the budget.
Yeah, we
Mhm.
do.
Definitely.
We can't do that in the fly at the town meeting. We have to-
No.
So if you're
no,
gonna
no,
add
no.
something, you have to find an offset, but how does it work with, if you're gonna cut something? Like, what if you have something in there and you propose to cut it?
What about increasing the override?
Well, then you're.
That was my thought.
Well, I think,
That was
to
my
your
thought.
point, I think it's different if you're cutting something. The reason that we have an issue is because adding something
Right, then you need to find an offset, but
gets
what,
us over, it gets us over the levy limit, so we absolutely have to find an offset. I think if we
But
were to
it-
cut something,
Anything we cut is gonna be controversial as well.
is all,
You know,
yeah, but
whatever we
if,
cut is gonna be also controversial, so we had better find something that's kind of vanilla that we can substitute.
When you say increase the override, Jack, are you, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, are you referencing increasing an override for the town operations that's
Yes.
separate from the school
Yes,
school
yes.
budget?
So that would be,
No.
the-
we haven't contemplated that yet, though, have we?
no,
There's
but,
no
I
town
missed
operating
something?
override.
no, but I think the option
I'm
would
jumping
be,
ahead then.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes, yeah, he's right. So, yes, we would juxtapose the two, right, one would be higher, right, the school override.
The school, it would basically
Right.
net
Sorry.
out to an increase in the school override.
That
Which
would
we
be very
couldn't
good,
do
so
on
that,
town
we
floor.
were-
We couldn't really do on town meeting floor. I don't think.
I don't think so.
I don't think you could take something from
Yeah.
Article 1
yeah.
and say, well, we're
We-
not gonna
we
fund
better
it
think
here, so
about-
we're
We're
gonna
gonna
add.
amend
Oh,
our-
no, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
agreed,
that would
right.
have to
I'm
ask
sorry,
legal, but
you're right.
I don't
We have to think
think,
about this.
yeah, I don't think we can
Well,
do
that's
that.
really the same, that aspect holds true for all of this,
Exactly.
Right,
right? There's no
Right.
different leafs or personnel or staff, I mean, that's true of all of it.
True.
my other thought was that along that, if they say, the town says X, we just say, we're not gonna have a negative, we're not gonna take away, because everything's already as thin as it can be, tax it, we're gonna have to have an overriding.
Yeah, but we
Plan.
couldn't, we wouldn't, that needs to both be on the warrant
Yeah.
and, already be on the ballot.
so we can't do an override on town meeting floor either.
Right.
And it's politically incorrect to simply say, okay, we're gonna just increase the school override because we
Right,
can't get
right.
relief stuff done or something like that. That would be killed about that.
So, we'll spend some time
Yeah.
doing a little strategizing and we'll
Yeah.
circle back.
Okay.
There's no
Next
easy
week.
answer to that. We have to really think about that. It might be a combination of things that we have to come up with.
Yep.
So where am I lost then? So if we decide to say, or the town says, no, we want the additional DPW worker and loose leaf pickup,
I don't
We're
think
not
that-
necessarily gonna give that as an option in our recommended budget. Likely won't. That's the least likely
Yeah,
But
option.
if it's brought up at town, where,
Highly
where
unlikely.
where we think it's rakes and fire and all that
So
going on,
I
if someone asks that
think
question.
we need to figure out what's in the Article 1 levy limit budget
Yeah,
of these three options.
Yeah.
Feels like we all, from the standpoint of going after the 40K savings, would like to propose that it not be there, but we're faced with the
yeah,
potential kind of backlash, or no, we want it, right? Not being able to sell it on the basis of 40K savings when we could keep it as is for no net difference.
Yes, so my suggestion, and I'm a little working on the fly here, is that you leave it in there now and you make a motion on the floor.
Make a
excuse
motion on
me,
the floor to strip it out.
to take it out.
Yeah,
And then you have the
I think that's the only,
And
yes.
then you have, and then you have the
Yes, that's
discussion
what you're
around it.
asking.
You can
Yeah.
do line items
To
to
take
strike,
out-
but you can't add without finding.
Right, so you could, you'd fund it as status quo.
Yeah.
And you'd propose going from loose leaf to bag and say, it's $40,000 of savings, and this is gonna be the impact.
And on a $20 million budget, most people would say no, and we move on. That's just
Yeah,
my guess.
yeah.
that's
But it,
what happened.
But I think that way, you're not setting yourself
I
up to be in
agree.
a position
I
where you're
agree.
trying to back out other items that are all budgeted where they should be.
But we're going to town meeting.
In-
The
Inviting,
FinCom is going to
We're
town, is
highlighting
presenting a
issue.
budget saying, here's the budget, but we really think you should back, we should back this up.
Yeah, I mean,
Right,
it
amending it.
feels cumbersome and ill-conceived in that regard, but I don't know, there's,
we're also highlighting an issue and
It's- yeah.
waving it in people's faces.
I don't disagree.
Um,
But I think, on the flip side, if that DPW expense line goes up $10,000 and nobody has any idea that the net impact of that is that we're changing from loose leaf pickup to bag leaf pickup, and they approve the budget and
Yeah,
don't
no,
know that that's the
that's
case,
not a good.
Right.
all of a sudden when we're not
Scenario.
doing loose leaf pickup
Yeah,
in
no,
November,
no.
that's when the pitchforks are gonna
Right,
come out.
right, no,
out.
the
Right, so
transparency is
And you won't be
important.
here to explain it either.
We'll be sitting
I'll
there
be-
with
I'll be-
your phone
I'll be-
number.
What did he do? He
Oh, God, I have no idea.
Keep the tape.
I think,
But unfortunately, for you, maybe, you will be here for town meeting. So
Absolutely.
you
Not
are
in November.
not in November when there's no list, but you're right.
So the flip side of that is, it's not something that, it's something we want to bring to their attention regardless,
Yep.
I think.
correct.
Yeah,
Honestly,
I mean,
it's too big of a change in service.
Oh, yeah.
We know it was too contentious at town meeting
Yeah.
when it was
Right.
previously brought up. I don't,
Can't sneak that through. That's
No, I just think that we should put in the budget what we think is the right thing for the budget and
Catherine will be up for
explain.
election the following year.
Right, yeah, maybe. But I think we need to put in the budget what we think is the right thing and explain it. And anticipate if there might be consequences to that and figure out, although that's the hardest
The
route.
problem is we're preemptively removing the service if we do so. Because the right thing is the $40,000 reduction. Let's go to bag pickup. So we make that move preemptively without consideration for all this other aspects, like you just pointed out, someone might vote yay, and then they don't know they lost the service, and there's the it's high risk of failure, or big implications if it does fail on the floor on that basis, because we can't swap it out, we can't add it back in.
Well, that's the issue, because I do think we can say, by the way, as you can see in the DPW line, there's a $40,000 increase, decrease, whatever, and this is why. So we have to say that. We have
to
to
tell the people.
We have to explain why that number changed and the rationale, so people will know.
But
But
if we
that-
do that, that's the reduction in service right
The problem
there.
is from FY19 to FY20, it's actually an increase because we're funding FY19 with one-time funds from FY17 free
As I
cash.
said, it gets more complicated every minute. I don't know.
Yeah.
It isn't, it isn't to someone who sits with it every day, but we should let these guys go off and think about it.
Article for this, is it? So how do you, I did ask procedurally, how do you vote? I mean, you're presenting something that is a sub-item in your budget.
Well,
For
Alex will
discussion.
read
Postpone
through the
it.
line items from
Postpone.
each
But
department.
all I do is say hold.
Well, right.
Someone,
So that would be hold, and then it would be an hour and a half of line up with the mic.
Oh,
In all
Absolutely
seriousness,
will.
with risk of failing the budget, at Article 1, I might add, before we even get to the override, about loose leaf pickup. And I know people feel strongly, and that's fine, they're entitled to, every resident, and, school committee chuckled and kind of scoffed at loose leaf, but This is a town service, so.
Right, but you've explained all that, but at the end of the day, they're voting for the budget or not voting for the budget.
Voting for each line item.
No, they can amend,
Line
they can
items they
amend
can
any
amend,
individual
yeah.
line item.
Right.
It's not
Well,
like
that
the school
goes back
vote.
to the conversation you had. If you amend, you gotta do an offset.
Well,
So-
right, so they would have to propose the,
Okay,
I
sorry.
have a
Being-
proposed
right.
offset. If we're gonna add, the backhoe in, which was medium high on Board of Select,
That's it.
it was low on ours.
I don't think that's gonna make
Okay.
the cut.
It's
Okay.
gonna make the cut anyway, yeah.
Nice thought.
We had already said about,
But it's
FinCom
not
had
an offset
already
because it
said,
wasn't in, right?
We
yeah,
need to
but
think
it
about,
might go
we
in
need to
'cause
think
they have
about
it at
what
medium
our
high.
react, we
had it
can't do
low.
it tonight on the fly,
No, I
obviously.
don't
Just
think
spent- Just spent 25 minutes doing
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Right, so I
Yeah.
We
think
will
it's good to
we will
let these
continue to work on
guys
state
continue
special.
to work on
Thank you.
that. I
Yeah.
think
Thank you for giving it more
certainly
thought.
get the, you get
We need
the
a
concern.
fill
We got
in
it.
case it fails. An offset, whatever.
So I'm sorry to back up for a second, but can we back up for a second? So we had, on this sheet, the addition of a full-time police officer, which, at the time, both groups said medium. Sounds like maybe we can wait. Do you think that has changed, in your opinion, or in the chief's opinion, since we've had a resignation and a loss of?
I don't think that particular situation impacts the
Okay.
need, plus or minus.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure
Fair
that
question,
we
but-
weren't, that something hadn't changed that we should be thinking about more. Okay.
I have a quick question about, which was low for both of us, but on this emergency management coordinator at 6250, I didn't ask this the other day, but when we talked about it a week and a half ago, but what's the, is there a county position? Like, is this covered at the county level? It's not?
The county provides negligible services at this
hardly even a
point.
county.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Thank
really,
you,
the
Alex.
sheriff's department,
Thanks, Jack.
is
You're welcome.
really the only function, that's provided at the county level. So, there was some discussion actually at our department head meeting this morning, potentially about accessing grant funding through the MVP program or some other program to maybe help, subsidize that particular need, but no, nothing that the county provides.
Peter, when they submit their budgets to you, do they give you a 3-year plan or 1-year plan?
Their operating budgets are, just for the next fiscal year.
Yeah,
The capital is 5,
okay.
and we sit down and talk through both, but we don't do an operating
Are there,
beyond the next fiscal year.
Okay, so if we wanted to plan out future years for overrides or, because
Yeah.
right now, instead of arguing for loose leaf for 20 minutes, if we wanted to say, school budget's been 7% every year, we can almost rip the Band-Aid in 1 year, is
Yeah,
that
so we,
actually feasible?
we obviously do the budget forecasting
Yeah.
exercise at the
Yeah.
start of our budget process. It looks out over 5 years. It makes assumptions in the out years beyond the next fiscal year.
Hmm.
And we have shied away from applying projected enrollment shifts increases on the out year
Yeah.
school assessment, just because it's, historically not been particularly accurate, for one, and two, pretty variable once you get out beyond a couple years.
But if we look at the school budget last few years, we've been projecting 3, but it's really been 6 to 7. So I'm thinking that and then next year it's probably gonna be the same, right? Because if the OPEB goes through, there's an additional 250 level services. So is there a way that we can figure out how much an override would be for this year that might carry us 90% through the next 2 to 3 years?
For
Yeah,
the
that's,
schools?
For
well,
overall, for one,
for
'cause
everything. And that's a conversation that we've talked about.
Yeah, we have.
And I talked about a couple of years ago, and there hasn't been an interest in looking at, because we know,
Yeah.
closing out FY '20, that unless something really dramatic happens in terms of school enrollment,
Yep.
we are very likely gonna be having the same conversation next year for FY '21.
So my thought more as a resident too, is that, so it'll be 3 years in a row of and a FinCom member, I guess, at 3 years in a row of overrides. We're really thin on services, discussing loose leaf, increasing pay in steps, that after a while, the rock's getting pretty thin to get off, get crumbs off the stone. So I was trying to see if there's a way, maybe if we said for 3 years or whatever, we think it's gonna be this, and do it all at once. That way in future years, we're not cutting and having these discussions.
And I think,
Does that make sense?
yes.
Yeah,
Not
that's a good point.
to
Yeah, that's a very
preempt
good
that
point.
conversation,
But go ahead.
but the agenda item, the next agenda item, talking about the special purpose stabilization
Yeah.
fund and the operating override that
That's
will
my
go
next
along with that.
point, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we'll tie into that,
Okay.
and we'll kind of see where that goes, because I think that will give us some relief and can be tied back to something very tangible, that we've all been talking about, at least for the past several fiscal years, and clearly has had a dramatic impact on our levy capacity.
And I'll wait till we get there to answer my next question. Thank
Can I
you.
just have a real quick question on that position? Are there difficulties now? I suspect there's not, but between the coordination between the chiefs and the public health nurse in an emergency management situation? They coordinate and they work together cooperatively.
They do, when and if those situations arise. I think there could be a lot better integration,
10 eights.
between
8, 10 times.
those various
7,
elements.
4
So I think it's, that's something that the chiefs recognized, and there's been a fair amount of discussion about, between the health department, fire and police, of, it would be nice to have one person that's really designated wearing that hat as opposed to everybody wearing a part of it.
Yeah, that's a perfectly reasonable rationale.
Yeah.
Who takes the lead? Who's the command lead? If we had a real, bad storm or whatever, who is the command lead? Is it the fire chief, the police chief, or does it depend on the situation?
So the emergency management director has been both the police chief and fire chief historically. The assistant has been the other. It's been, was the police chief, was then the fire chief, and right now I think is gonna kind of depend going forward with how many other duties the fire chief has around town, and whether he's the capacity to continue on in that, or whether it be the police chief. And this is not, this position is not envisioned to be
The command.
that, in dealing with a storm situation,
Yeah.
running the command,
Yeah.
that would still be either the police chief or fire chief. This is doing all of the background administrative work, planning, coordinating amongst the departments, with other towns and so forth.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. So, moving down through the list, the compensation adjustments, I think we've talked those
Yeah,
through,
yeah,
so
I
we're
think
fine.
so. Right.
Expense increases, IT backup, disaster and recovery, that was a medium high from the BOS, high from the FinCom. My estimation, I feel like, is probably really shouldn't even be on this list, should just be in the level services budget, just because of the significant liability that's out there.
True financial risk.
Based on the fact that we don't have it in place now.
I agree, and that's my day job, dealing with some of
Yeah.
that, so that's,
Yeah, this
it's
is
a
one of
mess.
the ones, if we don't do it, if we don't do this investment, what are the costs if something goes awry?
Yep.
And it was significant.
Right.
Okay.
I could be convinced of that.
Okay.
I think I might be.
Tree planting.
So much for leaf.
Somebody just, how are we doing with that Albie Dodge fund?
So that was actually where we ended up the conversation.
Yeah.
Is I said,
Donations.
not to, we've got a $5,000, kind of base that Wayne
I
had.
think it's now 6,000, somebody else computed 1,000, his sister did.
Okay, that's news to me. That's
Really?
good news, going in the right direction.
Yeah.
I think Patty can confirm that.
Okay.
Trees.
Jill wasn't
Yeah,
listening.
trees.
Oh, okay. $1,000, additional $1,000 donation to the
Yes.
tree fund?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll be a wind system.
So, I think after the FinCom discussion, kind of where we ended up was maybe there should be some funding for it in the budget, but then that's like a challenge grant.
Right, right.
To, you know,
Right.
use some of the new tree planting fund. And, you know, we talked about going to town meeting and maybe trying to get the word out about it then, and
Yeah.
maybe even rent those cushions.
Cushions, yeah, I
and-
think the cushion's a great idea. I'd be willing to stand at the door and take donations and hand out cushions.
Okay.
$1.
Seat cushions?
Yeah, for those horrible chairs.
I think
Put
we
a
need-
dollar in the
I think
bucket,
we
plant a
need to charge
tree.
more than $1.
Well, probably more than, but you know, $1's so easy. You know what I think actually has, in my experience, works better? Any donation that you can make, and you'll get a cushion. And I'll bet you get more $10 bills than you get $1
Great
bills.
point.
Because they cost, we priced them out, they're between $5 and $7 each.
Gosh, you
So,
can buy them for less.
what's that?
So to rent them?
No, to buy
Oh,
them.
to buy them?
Oh,
Oh, I guess you maybe they can't rent
No,
seat
'cause
cushions.
renting.
Actually,
Rent to own?
sounds a little,
Yeah, no,
actually, as soon as I
We do
said
that with
that, I thought,
everything, but
sounds
not
a
with the
little
cushions.
skeevy.
Three-year lease?
Interaction.
3-year,
Yeah.
3-year lease agreement. We'll pay you
I don't-
$225 this year.
I don't
It's not
think,
soiled, right.
right, oh, yeah, I just got the shivers. So I don't think we can imagine an average $5 donation.
No, so it would take a couple of years, I guess is my point, for them to pay for themselves.
Yeah, or, yeah, I guess, or we just buy as many as we think we can sell, and not everyone we're not gonna buy a room full of
I
cushions the
think we
first
probably
year.
do like 100.
Yeah. Or 120, which would be our
120.
quorum, right?
So everybody who makes quorum gets a cushion.
The first 120 people to show up at town meeting can have a cushion for a donation.
Good incentive to get there early,
Yeah,
that's right.
and we've done this at other nonprofits. We've, tried to put sort of a fee on something as a donation, and you get what you ask for. And if you just put a bucket out and say, here's something cool,
Right.
but we'd like a donation, you get actually more than you would have.
I think also it's a good opportunity to inform people of the Dodge,
Yeah,
family and
That's
and what was done, like, so some sort of.
some posters,
Yeah,
some,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you've got the double platform. You can, you get the cushions and then you'd have just a general announcement,
Mhm.
Right.
just talking about it for
Right.
15 seconds at the start of the meeting.
we start those, limit those
That's right.
beginning of the meetings conversations.
Which then circles back to what amount at which, should this line item be funded in the budget? If it,
I missed the cushion discussion originally.
the idea
Is it a foam cushion? Like a
we've
foamy
got several different cushions if you want to look
And-
at our
And was
options.
there any discussion of like water or snacks? Like someone would pay $10 to get water or snacks
Well,
instead of a cushion?
lunches.
Are we allowed? Yeah, I guess we are allowed to eat. I'm in the wrong
Lunch is for
town.
free.
Yeah.
Oh, we
In
have
Hamilton,
lunch.
you're
Yeah,
not
we have
allowed
the
to
lunch
eat.
for
Yeah,
free.
yeah.
So,
So it came up when we were talking probably about trees, at the same time that we were talking, I think, probably about town meeting debriefing. I don't know how
It was
they,
part of the
the
it was
debrief.
part of the debrief.
But it must have happened around the time that we were learning about the Albie Dodge
Yeah, so the
Memorial Tree Fund.
discussion veered to if we're gonna be, if we're getting these cushions, maybe we could ask for a small donation. What would it be good to go for? We went around a couple different things, and we ended up at the
trees.
new Dodge
Right.
tree planting fund.
I think the fundamental is people may be willing to sit at the meeting longer if they have a cushion. I think that was the original, right, underlying premise. And,
Those seats
Can
are
you put
terribly
that in notes?
uncomfortable.
right, and, right?
Why do
But
we
then
wanna
we
make them
turn
more
it,
comfortable? Excuse me, let's go back to the beginning. Why
because,
do we want people to sit there longer? We want them to itch and get the hell out of here.
well,
didn't work last
that
time.
didn't work out so well last year. They were itching to get out of there, and they did, and then we didn't have a meeting. Or we had to have a second meeting. Anyway, that's what that was. But, so, right now, we have 10,000 proposed. It's not in the budget. It would be added,
It would be added.
right? And we're thinking that there should be something in there? considering how high visibility tree planting has been, it's kind of hard to make it 0, right?
I think we might want to replicate what Albie Dodge did by asking for donations for tree planting in different areas in the town. East Wenham, sections of East Wenham. I think people who, of means, might want to actually donate for a section of town that they would give several $1,000s for tree planting. It's just an idea.
You're allowed to put a bucket out there?
Pardon me?
You're allowed to put a bucket out there?
You mean take donations?
No, I'm talking about sending checks to town hall, just like Albie
Yeah.
Dodge did, and say, okay, here's $2,000 or $3,000 to plant on, I'm making up. I don't live in Cedar Street, but Cedar Street. It's close to where I am. Morgan Street, closer.
But
Well, you know, I
it's
think.
still the same question. Were you still allowed?
I wouldn't, it'd be a bucket, I think it'd be a restricted donation to town, just like Albie Dodge, Win Dodge, excuse me. And that, I don't know.
Well,
Yeah, so I think the question then is, are we just going to do the solicitation, or do we want to also include some level of funding for it in the budget?
I know.
you know, I guess if I keep, my school committee hat keeps falling back on. And if I'm sitting there thinking, okay, we've got this override and it's big and it's at, you know, because the towns can't afford stuff, and they're putting tree planting in for even 5,000, which means our override is 5,000 more, which equates to, you know, 10 textbooks or something. I think that starts to get to be a hard sell.
If you're cutting loose leaf pickup to save $40,000,
That's not-
Then we're gonna be making more
on the other hand,
leaves.
can you say
We're gonna plant 10 more trees.
increase funding at $5,000?
Right,
Yeah, I
right.
don't
I
disagree.
feel like we just have to.
All of it falls into that.
Yeah,
Overall category.
I would be comfortable, I don't know all the history of the tree planting with the town, I have
There
heard
hasn't
it,
been any, that's why we're
Right.
talking
I've
about
heard
it.
it discussed
There's been a lot of
on
discussion,
occasion. But I've been looking around, there are lots of trees in the area. And I know we're cutting down a lot that are dead, but we still have a ton of trees in the area. A lot of them are older. The benefit of the younger trees is that they grow and they absorb carbon. But, and the older trees, you could argue, don't do that as much. But I would be comfortable having nothing in the budget and then trying to increase awareness and solicit targeted donations.
Maybe we could do a real strong solicitation campaign,
I think so.
and then depending on what the results of that were, say, okay, I guess there isn't the interest or support for it. Maybe we do have to include some funding in the budget next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, could
Good
you
idea.
put
I
on
like
the
it.
tree, donated by so-and-so?
And I like the idea of, I think people would respond to the idea of a restricted donation even on their street.
Yeah.
Like, I will donate $2,000 if you'll plant a tree in this area on my street where you've just cut one down.
It's not
As
deductible.
opposed to,
Not deductible.
because it's restricted.
No, because I asked that question, because
Yeah.
it's a big difference. It's not a C3, it's a C4 governmental.
Yeah, so I'm not sure.
I only say that
that-
because people will still throw in a 5, a 10, a 20, or whatever, or a couple bucks, whatever is appropriate for them. But I just think the 2,000 is at a level of generally there's
Yeah.
an associated tax
So,
benefit.
I guess let me rephrase that then. I think we might be more successful if someone could say, I would like to donate a tree. If it can be, to be planted on my street, rather than, I would like to make a donation of X dollars to help to plant somewhere. I just think that's,
Well, that was
right?
what I just said a few minutes ago, except I didn't narrow it to a street, how about a little area,
Well, I don't know, depends on the street. I mean,
could be
Larch Row is really long, some streets are really short.
I don't think, we can go back and see how that account was created. I don't think that there would necessarily be
There was
an
no
issue.
geographic limitation on that donation, as I recall.
No, but I don't think there's an issue with
Doing-
earmarking,
Earmarking,
Yeah,
which is
yeah, because,
essentially-
yeah.
So we'd have to
So,
check.
yeah.
Okay, so sounds like we're striking that one for now, from the
Reluctantly,
operating budget, right?
Right,
we should.
but we have some, I think, at least a plan to make up, a way to perhaps make up that. Down to the last pencil guys, so we're gonna have to.
We haven't been planting trees for 15, 20 years, and so, you know, that's the problem.
It's a shame because we've just
Yep.
sort of gotten on a roll of now, we're cutting a lot of trees and we've just gotten on a roll of funding for the planting. So from that point of view, it's a shame. However, the reality is, trees are now competing with education, which doesn't really feel right.
Right.
And again, we can, also
No
at the
trees,
same,
a lot of educated kids, that's right.
also at the same time, look at grant options for
Yeah.
that. We have, and not been able to find any yet, but it doesn't mean that we might not be able to get creative.
Yeah.
People might be enthusiastic about donating trees for
Are
different
there
ways.
any 501c3s in the area that we could partner with to get the donations to go to, like?
Hamilton Wenham Garden Club is under the
Yeah.
umbrella of a garden club structure for the smaller,
And
because
they're
they're not gonna fund.
501c3?
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah,
they are.
yeah.
I don't know what WVIS does, or the Garden Club, or ECTA, the Essex County Trails
Trails.
Association, but we're talking about more like suburban neighborhood.
Yeah,
I think the garden club would
Yeah.
probably be the
Mm.
best fit.
I think so too, yeah, I mean, they're doing a great job with the,
For the garden.
with the garden over at Pingree, yeah,
Yeah.
doing a bench in the memory of my father-in-law, and it's
Oh.
looking great,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that's, you know, a great community organization
Yeah.
and great involvement.
And I could,
Reach out.
I've
That way
obviously
you
been
don't even
working on.
You don't have to reach too far, because I bet
No.
they're here a
That way
lot.
people could get their tax donation,
Right.
I mean, their tax.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But there
yeah.
might be, some kind of partnership that we set up where they're the pass-through,
Yeah.
and then they would be the ones donating to the Dodge Memorial technically.
Mhm.
Right, I mean, it's definitely a great idea, yeah, if that's,
Okay,
if
okay.
that entertain it.
It's, I think astounding if we do it well, that it wouldn't be hard to find $10,000 worth of donations in this town. If we get the right people and make the message clear and the right
I'll
message.
donate some, actually, right now, I'm gonna pledge to donate, because I decided to cut it in the loose leaves, but I'm gonna plant a tree.
Yeah, I
All
think,
the ones I
yeah,
planted in my yard, so someone else can do it.
yeah,
Okay.
okay. What else?
We have part-time consultant, page
The
2, backhoe.
Backhoe, yeah.
Backhoe. Hmm.
So David, I think to your point on that one, did we cover that one?
Which
Well,
one?
the finance committee came out in a different position in the BOS.
On
which one?
Backhoe.
So, sorry,
Oh.
you were asking about the Age and Dementia Friendly Community Initiative?
Yeah, we regrouped them all together. I was more speaking
We
out
grouped them
loud. Is
together.
that- Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
that's
like,
what
is
I
that
was
where
gonna
we
make
left
sure we're on the
off?
same page. Okay,
It wasn't like,
so we're on to capital, right?
Oh.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, we were in a different,
Wasn't there some discussion that could be deferred?
Mhm.
Yeah, there could be new information since I made this. I don't even remember how I ranked it. I don't have my own, but obviously it was either medium or high.
This was a collective ranking.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Not just yours.
Well, no, but the collective was medium high. So I
you
must
were
have either
medium
been
or
high or medium, and I can't remember which. But I don't think I was low. But I guess my point is, I'm interested to hear the latest information on whether that could be deferred, and, because I
Was
think
the other piece of equipment.
I could change my mind.
Yeah, so I don't know that there's any late breaking information, but the finance committee, when Bill was in, did talk to him a fair amount about it, and
Yeah.
he, talked about the fact that the mini excavator purchased a few years ago really extended the life. That was the goal.
Mhm.
And that, obviously this is the biggest cost. It's not really $40,000, it's really $120,000. So not only would it be something that we'd have to find funding for this year, but if we structured it this way, it would be out in the out years. And so the thought here is that, it certainly will need replacing, but it's not in danger of imminent failure, I guess was, and that the mini excavator could do a lot of what the backhoe already is doing. So they've kind of taken the backhoe out of a lot of the day-to-day work that it had done historically, just because the operators actually prefer the mini excavator for a lot of it. So, not ideal, I'm sure Bill would say that very clearly, but probably something that could manage to be deferred.
That's the sense I got, yeah. I didn't get the sense that there was a whole lot of work they couldn't do, or that the other machine was in, dire need, falling apart. But I'm sure we're gonna need it at some point.
Yeah, the
I
thought
think,
is, even if there's a catastrophic failure, they could get through the rest of a fiscal year with the mini excavator.
Right.
For a large majority of the work that we need to get done.
and assuming we do buy it, it'll still likely be structured as like a 3-year, 3x40, right? It's not like we're gonna go all in or call it a capital item, most likely, right? We tend to do those short-term leases.
That could be a discussion
Unless we
at
had a
some point, but-
stabilization fund to take it out of.
But,
Yeah, I mean,
Not-
the issue there is, because, I remember when we had this discussion about capital needs at the start of the budget process, or maybe in December, and, there was some ask about, well, can we roll in multiple larger purchases into a debt exclusion? There really isn't
enough.
much else
Right.
big equipment out on the horizon in the next 2 or 3 years that we can kind of bundle.
Right.
So that's
That's
where
fine,
that issue,
right,
we're not
right.
gonna do a debt exclusion for a backup.
No. Well, I think the general line is something around $1 million worth of capital in order for it to make sense to do that. So, Jack, you and I, and perhaps John, were the ones who gave this a higher rating than the FinCom. How are you feeling about it tonight?
I just think, generally speaking, the highway department, of all the services that the town delivers, police, fire, obviously we need to have a good ambulance and fire service, but the people in the town really count on the highway department, whether it's plowing the roads or whatever they do. I just put that, and they're very frugal, and they work there very, very hard. You never see them smoking by the side of the road, drinking having coffee. They're busting their ASS. And I think that when Bill Tyack says he really needs a piece of equipment, I'm really supportive of that piece of equipment. And that, as opposed to we're on TV, but
Yeah, careful.
excuse me. Other departments in town, I think that I would rank the highway department in terms of people's satisfaction with the town, in terms of services delivered, is the highway would be right up there. You don't see the police. We need the police. We need the fire, but. They're out there last night plowing those roads at 10 o'clock, and that they were all done by midnight, I think. So that I think if you went to Hamilton, you'd be sliding all over town. Excuse me, and the Hamiltonians. So I just think that if Bill Tyack, I think he's very frugal, and when he wants to, really thinks he needs a piece of equipment, he asks for it, and I think I'm supportive of that ask. That's just a general statement. I want to be supportive of it. That said, we have a budget.
I totally agree with what you said. It's a very high-value department, right? We get a lot for it, and we ask a lot of Bill's department with, they do a lot with little. Definitely frugal. They put a lot of pride in their work. They take care of their own machinery. They don't have a lot of lavish toys.
Hardly, yeah.
So, and I'm sure they could do more with more. And I definitely support the purchase of it. In general, if we can defer it this year, would be my.
I'm not objecting, I'm just saying, somebody asked
Yeah.
me, why would I value the highway department?
Yeah.
I just made a statement of why I value the highway department request higher than other departments.
No, agree 100%.
I don't think it'll be any easier next year, but if we could defer it next year, I think the override is gonna be a substantial override.
Next year.
This year.
Yeah.
This year, yes.
This year.
With certainty. Yep.
And if we could defer this into next year, maybe make I don't know if you can make a commitment to deferring it, but.
So it's yet another, if we defer it, it's yet another example of
It's another
a
effort.
big ticket item that the town needs, that we are beyond lean on and deferring 1 year. Because I suspect, I don't recall from prior years, but I suspect that he has kind of wanted this for a couple of years. I know that the mini excavator was designed in part to extend the life of this, and that's thematic, right? That's like, hey, we're going cheap on this to, well, it's the mini's a big, the mini is a real piece of equipment. I'm not trying to say we cheaped out, but nonetheless, it's.
Just a mechanical question, I suppose. If the backhoe went south, what would I mean, do we know what a major cost would be to repair it, to keep it going?
Depends on what the issue.
I know, but do they have,
Yeah.
they say this is gonna go, or, you know,
Don't
can they
have
predict that?
Can't speak to that.
Okay.
Well, and would that be something, if it does go south, we would either have funds somewhere in a state, would you use stabilization fund, or where would we get our RFT from?
It'd be RFT,
From what account?
reserve fund.
Reserve fund.
I think Bill
Which
Tighe
fund
is
is
pretty parsimonious in asking for equipment when he thinks it's at the end of its useful life.
Right.
And so, I mean, this is his judgment, he's an engineer, and that he doesn't ask for stuff that's not at the end of the useful life he doesn't need. So, you know, can we go another year? Yeah, but I would just put it in the category of a legitimate request.
Yep.
Can we defer it a year? Probably, but nevertheless, I think it's a legitimate request.
I think just to step back and look a little bit at the big picture in terms of capital, because to your point, if we're not funding it this year, we're gonna be talking about it next year. The two pieces of, well, multiple pieces of equipment for the fire department, the protective gear and the air packs, that's a two-part ask.
Computers.
Yeah.
That amount of $41,000
It's gonna be in there
is
next
gonna be in
year.
the FY21 budget too. It then is gonna drop off, but it's a 2-year ask. So it's not as if we fund the fire department needs this year,
It frees up.
$40,000 drops off for next year, and we can slide in the backhoe at that same amount. So that's just to keep in mind.
And we need to buy the protective gear, that would be.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good thing.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of thoughts on this. I agree completely with Jack that, you know, he doesn't ask for things that he doesn't need, and he's probably asked for it a couple of years, and it probably
No, this is
is
the first year.
first year.
This is the first year, but it was,
Well, it was going to, the mini excavator was going to extend the life of this.
yeah, I mean,
And it has.
I'll say that,
It has.
the 5-year CIP is not meant to be an aspirational document. It's meant to be realistic in terms of when
Right,
those things need to be replaced. And I think Bill, to Jack's point, if anyone, was incredibly realistic about what year each of those items should be slotted in. And that's been slotted in consistently in FY20.
Right.
So it wasn't as if it was there as a wish list or a
Right,
hope.
no,
It was,
no.
this is when it needs to be replaced.
So I get that, and I'm sure it's a true statement. I do think, though, that there's somewhat of a townwide equity situation in that we are trying to address the needs of the DPW, and things that they feel would make them a more efficient, not in a capital way, but certainly with the loose leaf collection, stormwater thing. And we're about to talk about highway road capital, which I think for me, if I had to choose between a backhoe this year and continuing to fund road capital, I think that would have, the road capital would have a higher priority, unless we thought we could do both.
And I think FinCom would agree based on the conversations that they had.
So, maybe we just sort of park that one. Again, I'll give that a
question.
a question mark. But when we get down to the end of this, I feel like if something has to drop out, that would be the thing that, for me, would drop out. But then there's highway road capital.
So yeah, just to orient again, the conversation, in FY19, road capital is funded, total $85,000. 40 of that's in the FY19 operating budget. 45 of that was using FY17 free cash. So what's included in the FY20 budget at this point is the same $40,000 that's included in the FY19 budget, which would have a net impact of decreasing that line by $45,000 from FY19 to FY20. And really what we've been trying to do is increase it by $5,000 a year. And so the original request from Bill was for $90,000. So that's where that $50,000 cost impact is. There's still $40,000 in the DPW budget for highway road capital. But again, that's a reduction from the 85 net, that is funded in FY19.
And they spend, do you know what their FY18 actual was? I mean, they spend it all, I can assume.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is every penny of this.
Okay.
This is basically, I think I had sent around the email from Bill about what this goes
Oh, yeah,
towards, following up on our conversation last week to both BOS and FinCom. And it goes for a little bit of everything, quite honestly. So some of it's kind of repair and maintenance for winter damage and that kind of thing in the springtime. But it's also used to supplement our Chapter 90 funds, the $150,000 we get from the state each year for road work. And generally what Bill uses that for is when you put in a request for Chapter 90 funds to the state, it's not like we just get the money and we can use it for whatever. That money is there, but in order to access it, you have to put in an application and have that approved by the state. And if it gets, if you budget for a $75,000 road project, and for whatever reason, in the course of going through the project, it comes in higher than that, it's incredibly hard to go back to MassDOT and get them to change that amount. So we backfill with that, and if there is a difference, and he also uses it to pay for things like police details and those kind of ancillary costs associated with road projects, so that our Chapter 90 dollars are really extended as much as possible when we go through that. So it's definitely a high priority line item, and has actually was funded up in the $100,000 range, had a big cut a number of years ago. We've been trying to work back up to that number.
I don't know how we tell people we're not gonna fix the roads, so.
And on the flip side, Chapter 90 funding, there's $50,000, a $50,000 balance. We'll have another $150,000 in another couple months. But most of that at this point is earmarked to go toward the Main Street traffic engineering to get to 25% design, unless we're able to secure some other state funding for that, which will mean that essentially there won't be any major road work done in this construction season until we're able to access the next round of funding from the state.
And I think that's probably what that means. It's probably not we can't fix the roads, it's probably like there will be no new paving projects. And, it seems as if the DPW tries to identify one part of a road or one road in a given year that is identified as the worst in town and does some paving. I think that's more likely to be what we see as an effect, not fixing potholes or.
So
Right,
I
am
think
I
Bill
right?
would say if the road capital budget's only funded at $40,000, that's going to
Guess it's down to
meet-
crack repair.
Yeah, that's crack sealing and pothole repairs, definitely. But you'll notice from time to time, like on Larch Road this year, there were kind of these, it's not just potholes, but a short stretch of road.
Caved.
What's that?
It caved.
That they did a whole section of, and those kinds of repairs won't happen.
And well appreciated, it was right in front of my house.
So there's a note that says potential to fund at a lesser amount under consensus ranking.
Well, and that was kind of, again, at the end of the conversation with the finance committee, it doesn't have to be funded at $50,000, it could be funded at any number, so maybe there's a lesser amount that gets us somewhere, but not all the way to the $85,000 or $90,000 that we're seeking.
I know I should know the answer to this, but do we have any expenses associated with the repairs and the, not the paving, but the, on Longfellow, not the paving, but the, what am I trying, embankment control. Does the town have any?
We do, I'd
Responsibility?
have to go back and look at the,
Yeah.
at that warrant
I feel
article.
like we said they would do the paving.
Yep.
And we would contribute something towards the, why am I not thinking of the word, the,
Yeah, but
Betterment.
yeah,
the, the,
Was that the
no,
easement?
the embankment, the
cliff?
Oh, yeah.
guardrail that was
Yeah.
going to protect
Protect
people from
people.
going
It
over.
was a
the-
safety issue.
Yeah, I feel like there was something that we committed to, that the town would contribute. And that-
60,000?
I don't think that that's budgeted anywhere. Is it?
Going back a ways, you're right, it was something.
Yeah, that was
60.
60,000, that's fair.
I should leave right now.
So how would we pay for that? Just hypothetically, since we've committed to paying for it, and it's going to happen in FY '20, I presume.
Yep.
Huh.
Add that to the
Garden.
list, right?
Why are we not budgeting for that?
That was kind of where I was going. And I may be thinking about it because I spent so much time with the
But we
the
caught it now, so
process.
that's good.
Yeah, so I guess that's a question, how do we, but,
Well, it's a scary
it's a
road.
commitment we've already made, so it's not as if we
Yeah.
could cut it,
Yeah, right.
right?
Just
I
need
mean,
to
it's,
account for it
town meeting
financially.
has approved it, it's gone through state legislator.
It's funded through last year's overlay reserves.
Through last year's overlay reserves.
Yep, so it was it was.
Oh, there's money
Oh,
set
it's
aside for it
already?
already?
It was in the warrant article. I
Oh.
thought so, I just need
Okay.
to double check.
Okay,
okay.
thank goodness.
Sorry, I wasn't really
I was
listening.
wondering
I
what the
just-
hell you were reading.
That was a
That-
painful-
I know, I
30
knew,
seconds.
I
No.
could tell that he
Getting
thought,
actual information instead of just surmising.
I know, yeah,
I-
right.
I knew at the time that we needed to have an appropriation and
Yeah.
not the promise of something.
Yeah, and I
So,
just was
yep.
not remembering, but the
Yep.
60,000 was definitely in my head. Okay,
Yep.
great.
Very well.
Price is
Yeah,
averted.
Check that box off.
So if anyone
Anything else
asks,
funded through over?
Wait, what else is in
Why
there?
don't you just keep reading, Peter?
Yeah, so.
Take up another
no, thank
60K.
goodness, because that's, that was,
Cool.
of course, makes
So
complete
as-
sense.
And as to the like varying amount, I mean, it's anybody's guess, right? So I think we just threw it out there. We weren't hell bent on a particular like, well, because I mean, how much better is 30 than 50?
Right.
It's still there. I mean, I don't know.
This
I don't
point.
have a strong. I don't know what would lead me to pick a certain number, other than 50. Other than just arbitrarily saying, well, let's do half, which may be appropriate. I don't really know.
Well, getting back to our discussion about DPW, my sense is he has a sense that the 50,000 is going to cover future needs.
Oh, I'm
He
sure
knows
he knows exactly where that's going.
Discussed, Right,
Right,
right.
he's a good man.
Mm.
So lucky to have him.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and, yeah, it's hard to, it's infrastructure. It's really hard to argue with, and to your point, Alex, what do you cut it to, you know?
I think the one thing you can cut it to is 45. It's level funding, it FY19 to FY20.
So at least there's a anchor, or, you know, a point that,
It's a good point.
You know, we're not increasing it.
right,
but
so at
we're-
least
we're
level fund it.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
That sounds like a good idea. It doesn't make a
Doesn't,
huge difference,
Difference, right.
but it also shows that, again, we're looking at every single thing, which we
And-
clearly are.
$5,000 is the cost of the compensation adjustments for the COA staff.
Yep.
Real money.
Okay. That was the last thing that we had a difference of opinion
No,
on.
roof replacement.
Oh, roof.
COI.
COA roof replacement.
Well, yeah, you know what? I have no knowledge of how important that is, so I'm gonna just defer on that one. I'm sure that that roof needs something, but I don't know. I truly don't know how. And whoever recommended this, I think, would have a better sense of if it's necessary to do now than I would have. For me, it would just be a number. And I
so,
think it's a
you know,
reasonable number. I think it will cost $21,000 to repair
Yeah,
that roof.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
because of prevailing winds
Right,
and so
no
forth.
question.
You know, after the board first talked about this in December, I went back to the facilities manager and said, you know, am I right in defending that this is you know, something that needs to be dealt with sooner than later? And the feedback was, absolutely, it's in really rough condition. It's not leaking now, but certainly could 18 months from now be a significant issue, because that's what we're talking about. If we don't fund it this year, it would be, you know.
Was the question asked, and this may sound pretty stupid, I suppose, but was the question asked whether you could do one side of the roof 1 year and then go to do
It's a
the,
full strip. There's,
so you can't
Yeah,
do it,
more
you
expensive
can't do
to
it
do
in
it.
sections,
No.
kind of.
It's not a very big roof,
no,
and it seems like a lot of money, but I'm sure that's what it is.
So when we do roofs privately, we don't, so the people we hired may not have been doing prevailing wages, is that the difference?
yeah,
Right.
you don't have
Right.
to. We're required to.
Oh, I didn't know that
It adds a
maybe we
factor
weren't.
of
Oh.
something significant to everything that we do that has labor.
At minimum of 2x, for something like roofing, it might even be 2.5x what you'd pay to
Yeah.
have the same job done on your
Huh.
roof.
I would think that'd be like 12 grand for
Yeah.
that roof.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
about it.
Like that's,
Just at a glance, and having done at our old house is similar.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
yeah, it's,
Right, we just did ours and it's.
right, but it's a, you know,
I
sort of a
didn't-
market rate.
right.
Right.
So
Competitive
it's tied
market.
into the region union market rate.
Mhm.
Oh,
For
so we pay
similar-
more as a community, as a town,
Correct.
Absolutely.
twice?
Municipal
Is it-
rates are more
Yep.
than private.
And that's for almost every major public works and construction project.
In Massachusetts?
Yep.
And is it union work that's required, or just that rate? I'm sorry.
Just the rate.
But it,
The idea being that we shouldn't, that municipalities should not be undercutting the unions if we're putting projects out to bid.
so we have to pay their rate regardless of who we go with, essentially.
Correct.
That's what prevailing wage.
That's what
Right.
prevailing wage
Yeah.
is.
I wish
So,
I didn't know that.
When
So there have been a number of legislative attempts to exempt the first like $50,000 from prevailing wage, because especially on these small projects, something that should be $10,000 is $20,000. And, you know, smaller municipalities, that's a lot, that's a big difference.
Big
And so that's gone nowhere
It's Massachusetts.
because of the lobby, yeah.
Yeah,
it's-
right, okay.
But that, I mean, clearly prevailing wage isn't going anywhere, but we've tried to carve out some exemptions. The Managers Association has led that charge, MMA, I don't know,
So this is one of the ones, for me, that if you don't make that investment, you have significantly higher costs later.
Potentially.
Yeah. I'm just thinking water leak and then
Yeah.
other problems from
Right.
that.
Well, wages don't go down either.
True.
wages go down.
It's, for me, this one signifies more than any of the others, aside from protective gear, which we're not talking about. The
Yeah.
fact that it's absurd that we are talking about it, perhaps absurd is not the right word, but when we're talking about a roof over the Council on Aging where, you know, for the seniors, it's ridiculous. So the roof is toast, as Peter stated before.
That's gonna live with
Yeah,
it.
it is.
It's
You've been
in a
quoted
good
on
way,
that one.
in a good way. There's a lot, you've said a lot more better things than that. And John pointed out that, you know, it's infrastructure you gotta fix in one of your meetings, and, you know, you gotta fix failing roofs. My inclination is to squeeze another year out of it and defer, but I also recognize that that's quite possibly not the right move,
The leaky year.
because you could very well have to regret that move, and if it proves to be a leaky year. But like Catherine, sorry, the last thing I'll say is, like Catherine, I have no idea. I don't know the state of the roof. I'm sure it needs it. I'm sure it's past its useful life.
You can see along the ridge, it's,
Buckland,
Yeah.
is it? Well, I think we're looking at 2 years, right? Because you have 18 months before the fiscal year. Are they gonna get, you know, bids within the next year and a half, or do they have to wait to get it done so they can start the
So if it's
process?
funded this year,
Yeah.
then it's, you know, 21,000.
done
If it's not funded this year, it would be 18 months from now that they
Right.
would be able to do the work.
Right. Right.
Otherwise, they would be doing it this summer.
Yeah.
Likely.
Yeah.
So,
Could we sell the building to somebody and then lease it back and have that new owner put the roof on and pay them to do the roof so we can get away from the prevailing wage? Ooh.
So we're gonna sell it to them, they're gonna lease it to us.
No, sell it to somebody, an independent person.
Sell it
Yes.
to me for $1.
No, and then we lease it back at a reasonable rate, and then have that person put the roof on, which we pay him to do because he'd charge us.
So we
And
don't,
then buy it back from the person.
we don't,
We launder money somehow.
that sounds like money
that
laundering,
kinda
doesn't
sounds like money laundering, yeah?
Not money laundering, it's not money laundering at all.
It's property laundering.
It'd have to be an attractive lease.
I don't think there's a law against
Yeah.
property
Yeah.
laundering, or something like that.
Well, so,
That,
but
you know,
there's, that,
well,
but,
just, you have to think out of the box here, that's all.
but we don't pay anything on the property now, so any lease payments would be.
But we get money if we sold it, okay? So, if we sold it to somebody, we'd be the recipient of money.
I understand.
Does the town of Wenham own
That'll be
it?
enough for us to pay lease payments for a couple of years while he fixed the roof, and we pay him to fix the roof. And to get it back, we'd have to pay prevailing wage, a friendly buyer. And by the way, I would buy the damn building, and give you a
I'm
good.
pretty
give you
sure
a
that the
good-
Inspector
give you a-
General's office.
Yeah, give you a good price.
The selectman buys the
I
building.
get Gary Cheeseman to buy it, there you go.
So
He
back
just
up a
raised his
second,
hand.
does the town of Wenham
He
own
and I
it?
would form a corporation, and then you would be the president, and that,
Wow,
Yes, you already
I
got a
don't know,
couple
yeah.
buyers here.
All to be exempt from prevailing wage.
all that to be.
yeah, it's just,
Okay.
if we're gonna save the town $12,000, we have to show them we're acting in good faith.
Good luck, Betty.
I know, like I'm going to jail. Yeah, right, get that orange suit ready.
People who are ready to bid.
We need to start
1, 2,
singing The Roof
3.
is Toast in the background.
Yeah,
As long as they buy it back from me at the same price I pay for it.
Oh.
there's whole that disposition
plus
of,
the roof, of course.
of buildings.
I think
and,
our legal
you know.
fees would be more than
I think they
21,000.
would.
You can get a lawyer, we have
Transaction
lawyers,
costs.
every time we meet, by the way, there's a lawyer with us, you know, I mean, with this, you know, the KP, we can't move without, you know, getting
So, my
a
question
4-page
again,
legal opinion on things.
do we own the building?
Uh,
Does the town of Wenham actually own that building? It's,
the former Legion building? Yeah.
I assumed we did. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, if we don't own it, we're not paying anybody rent for it, so we
No.
must own it.
well, yeah, I
Who's
don't,
paying the taxes on it then?
well, no one, I
It's a town
guess,
building.
it was a
It's
town
no tax.
building.
Non-taxable asset, yeah.
Oh. Wow.
Of course, I would also want to be away from the taxes.
Yeah.
Or charge you for it.
I think the
saying,
COA
just- I
director
don't
would
know.
probably prefer to skip the roof and have a bigger
If something
building.
costs 2.5 times X and it's gonna be $12,000 versus $25,000 or $30,000, I mean, I don't know. That's a lot of work just to save $12,000 or $15,000, but anyway.
Is there any opportunities to save on materials there? You know, donations or anything like that, or does it just come with the contractor?
I don't know a lot of roofing contractors
Yeah,
that
they're not-
donate services.
Not donate, but reduce costs for the materials. That's, you know, is that a
I
possibility?
don't think there's a tremendous markup.
There might be some
Yeah.
seniors who are part of the
Right.
council on aging.
Senior tax work
trying to-
program.
On the
Who
roof.
will get on the roof, tear that roof up?
Okay, we're getting desperate now. You know, my first thought went to the Essex, I don't know what it's called now, Regional North Shore Technical School, but I don't think they would do, I don't think they would be allowed to do
Little bit of
roofs
liability.
either.
That's
I
a
don't
They do
think
pay,
we
I
want.
know they'll
No,
do.
Kids on
I
the
don't think
roof.
we want the inmates from Essex
No,
County
not the admitted,
Sheriff's.
no.
There's-
No,
yeah.
it came to my mind because with the Habitat for Humanity House, they use, volunteer. And they use a lot of student labor, but they use it for things like painting. And,
2 feet on the ground, labor.
yeah, not for roofs.
Yeah.
Even though this isn't a very high roof, the peak is high enough to,
But you can kick it down the road. If something leaks, you know, repair the leak, you know. If you're in Appalachia, that's what you do. And that, you know.
When I was going into the Appalachia category, yeah.
We can kick it down the road for a year, as Alex just said a minute ago, or 2 years. And if it leaks, we fix the leak.
Yeah,
We
so
go-
We get right in there.
So I'll say that to
Hot
my
box.
knowledge, there have been no major patches done or
There you go.
that have been
A
required.
couple
So-
of big buckets, and just in case, you know.
There's no blue tarp on it, it's not an eyesore.
Sorry, Jim, we're just
I know.
kidding.
So why don't I circle back one more time? I think I've
Yeah.
talked this through enough.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I think
I'll
so.
circle back one more time.
Hey, one other thing, I
Any
just
more bold ideas?
throw it out there, it's not a bold idea, it's not a good one, but I'll throw it out there anyway. Didn't we, for the painting of the town hall, we did half and half in multiple years? I mean, it's to show the commitment.
That was
10 and 10. Did someone else say that already?
Yeah, half a roof, it doesn't
Sorry.
really,
Half-
it's
you have-
not really.
No,
as
I don't, I'm not
Every other
suggesting,
shingle, huh?
not suggesting we do, I'm saying we fund over 2 years. If we're in the same situation next year, potentially, or similar situation, facing an override, I guess I was saying to show the commitment to funding it, but I suppose that's immaterial. You know what I'm saying? Not doing half the work.
So, right, so-
Material, that's a play on words.
Material.
Not
So
that
the concern is not, for me anyway, not, okay, there's a leak, let's patch it. The risk, I guess, would be that there's some kind of a leak that's maybe not water pouring into the building, that's somehow destroying some other part of the infrastructure that
Yeah,
we
mold
find
in the
out
walls.
later, yeah.
Yeah, or
And
like.
I can't assess that.
I mean,
I'm not a facilities person, but
There are a
I've
lot, yeah.
seen that happen in homes that
Yes,
I've
I've
owned,
been
actually.
traumatized.
It's not
by
leaking,
that,
I think
that's
they'd go
what
another
it's
year.
okay.
That's kind of where I'm at too.
Okay.
And that,
I guess I'll have to go there more frequently than
Ends
otherwise we
the
go there just to
discussion.
make sure it doesn't leak.
Okay.
Yeah, except I just want to make sure that we recap,
oh, yeah, definitely need to recap.
right? So Peter, what do you think we agreed on?
My sense of what has been added into the FY20 budget is 3 more hours for the finance assistant, the compensation adjustments
Yep.
for the town clerk administrative assistant and COA administrative assistant and van drivers.
Yep.
The IT backup and disaster and recovery.
Mhm.
Highway road capital at 45,000.
Yeah,
Yep.
yep.
And protective gear and air packs for the fire department.
Yep.
And where do we stand, do you think, on the full-time,
Police.
the DPW
Oh.
issue?
Well,
Well,
so that's a-
this is called full-time driver
So
operator, but it's
that's
the,
a $40,000 cut.
okay, and but we're all agreeing that that's where we
I
should
think it's
go,
worth-
assuming they do a little more work to see
Yeah.
the contingency.
Understand the pitfalls. It's worth pursuing for 40K, but I don't want to have town meeting blow up in our faces.
So it's 107,000 up and $40,000 down. I'm not gonna say it's 67 net because I'm not sure where we're gonna end
That's
up on
fine.
the
That's
speed
fine.
pickup.
That's fine.
So,
Do you want to include the loose leaf pickup still in the budget? Is that,
We're gonna figure
yeah,
that out.
Okay.
a little offline discussion on that.
Yeah.
So,
What's
what
the
we've,
final
So
number?
I think, I'd say kind of at the high end, we added $107,000 into the budget. And the net impact of that would be to increase the school operating override then to $615,000.
What's your new number again? It was
Total.
559?
508.
It's now 508.
508, let's just start at 508.
Yeah.
It would be going to
615.
615.
What page are you on your doc?
That was, so that, David, that's on the roll up.
That's on the roll up, the back page is
Last page.
Started
508.
with, yeah.
Got it, thank you.
And then we're adding in 107, but if we net out the,
just one quick question. I pulled out the MS4 here, was I not supposed to do that? Because that's the case, it's not okay.
that's where the 50 is.
That's, yeah, I just realized that.
Why'd you do that?
Because in the initial sheet that we had like this, it was on there. And
Yeah,
I was trying to
Oh,
tie
it
it out.
was.
yeah.
So
And
what?
so I pulled it out when I was just happened to look at
You
this, I'm
had
like,
plus
why are
50
we?
for stormwater in there, right?
The initial sheet that we had with this when I was working on the schedule had the MS4 in it.
Yeah.
So when I was trying to tie back to the initial numbers we were working with, I pulled that 50 out, and then when I was looking at the one tonight, I realized it wasn't there. So I think I pulled 50 too much, which explains why I
Which would
couldn't.
explain why we were $50,000 off.
It was,
so there really should be $50,000 more in
So
this
I'm-
budget.
I
Is that what we're
believe that-
saying? We need to add 50,000.
So we're back right to the 559.
plus the
Hold on,
107.
sorry. So what number should be 50,000 higher or lower?
If you look on
That I'm looking
page
at.
6,
Yep.
under highway department expenses.
roll-up.
Of the roll-up,
Okay,
Yep.
that $50,000 that came out of expenses shouldn't have come
Oh.
out.
Because
The
that's the
second line.
non-contractual.
That's
or-
the
That's
stormwater.
the stormwater.
Non-discretionary stormwater.
Yep.
So that FY adjusted should be
brings us right back to the
276.
559.
And is that why, because it was 188 and 187 for expenses and capital respectively,
Right.
and originally,
We pulled some stuff out.
Right.
right,
Like the dehumidifier got pulled out,
yeah,
How much was that going to cost?
8,000.
right.
Okay.
Which I thought
Gonna
CP,
that.
CPC, CPA could pay
Decided not
for.
to do that.
Well,
Well,
they
no, that
didn't-
was more, they're not, they
Entertaining,
think they can
Solve it a different way?
solve it a different way.
oh,
That won't cost anything?
Yes,
oh, okay. So someone is looking into that.
absolutely.
Oh, great, thank
It's
you.
not taken off the list because we don't think it's important, taken
Okay.
off the list because they think they can address it in a different way.
Okay, I'm glad to hear
Look
that.
forward to hearing about that.
Yeah, me too, because I think it's really important.
So we're looking
We're back to the 559 number.
Plus 107.
What's that?
559 for the school,
Yeah,
plus 107?
plus 107.
And the 107 is with or without pickup?
107 is not talking about Lucy pickup going away. So
Okay.
that's the maximum amount.
So six.
559
So say
plus-
670,
So
give
that's
or take?
666.
666.
Oh, great.
And that's all,
Let's make it $1.
Can we,
$1.
yeah, can we like adjust that just a little?
I'm sure it'll move
It's
itself around a little bit.
665, 571.
Yeah, okay, good,
So,
so
because really,
this gets back to the
the
question I had
symbolism is a little too much.
at the start of this whole discussion is that
If-
107,000 for the town is gonna be rolled up into the school override article?
So, to your point, what we're doing is we're saying we are going to fund, hold on a minute, let me get the right number. We are going to include funding for $28,000 of the difference in our school assessment in Article 1, within our levy limit budget. The rest, the other 666,000 of the
yeah.
$694,000 increase is in an operating override. So,
So we're incorporating then the school override, the remaining part of the school override into an operating override.
yes.
yeah, what we're saying is we're
We're putting-
pushing, we're putting more on the town, in that, on the town side, in that Article 1 budget, and the difference goes to the school operating override.
Now that the school's adopted the budget,
Yep.
right, that line item is fixed. I mean, it didn't change, right?
Right.
But, so think of that as a department. I know that's an obvious statement. And then up to our levy limit, we're funding our town level services plus the 107, plus the was it a 3% plug originally?
Right.
Of the schools. Their total is 6.9 for the increase over FY '19 in the assessment, taking apportionment into account.
Right.
And what is your number? Was 135,000 of the increase, which is again 690,000. So we fund all but the increase, but a small portion of it at
Yep.
now
28,000.
28. So what was 135 is 28, given the 107 additional town expenses that we're contemplating. I don't think we're final, but that we're contemplating
But
adding.
to your point, and to the school committee's point, we're labeling it a school operating override, because we have the ability to do that.
Yeah, which I think is, I mean, it's, whether it's a policy decision or whether it's a communications vehicle, I mean, they're honing in on that intently, exclusively almost.
I can partly understand their argument, though.
He's been on the school committee too. So
Because
Sure,
I kind of understand it, and I think at least the way I'm viewing this thing, is for the town, it would seem to me that you'd want to really separate out what are the town expenses for an override and what are the school expenses for an override, and have them two separate numbers.
But then we would have to,
Maybe I
we'd have to have a mix in the Article 1 budget, and then a mix in the override. So we'd be juggling things around if we wanted the override to include some town, obviously town things, and some school things. The question I have on that, well, I see where you're going though, but the question is, the school is going to put out so they're going to, maybe, they can spend their money however they want. So if they get a $500,000 override, or they don't get it, they can decide what to not spend, what to spend. Do we have that same ability?
Well,
I mean, if we were to,
if the operating override.
if we
fails.
had an operating, if this operating override included town and school things together, and it failed,
Oh, could we back out our 107,000, you're saying?
are we tied to which $107,000 that is?
No.
No. So we would just have to go back and find 107,000 to
Yeah.
cut. We would
Yes.
probably identify what that would be,
Well,
because that
what
would be
we-
the right thing to do.
What we talked about.
Just like
at
the schools.
At the start of the.
Schools
well,
have it, should.
Yeah, the start of the process was if we needed a town operating override, for whatever reason, level services or otherwise, whether we'd want to combine the operating overrides with the schools or have a standalone operating
Right.
override. And generally, what we agreed on, as part of that discussion, was that if it came to that, we would have a town operating override separate. Because regardless of what the schools did, recognizing that they have the bottom line budget, we would want to call out what that would look like if
Right.
the override failed. We'd want to say, these are the things
Here are
that
the
would be
services,
cut.
town
Right.
services that would be cut.
Right, this is the staffing, these are the
Right.
services
Right.
that would be impacted.
Right. In fairness to Jim, I think the Board of Selectmen are discussing, we haven't made a final decision, is to separate out the school override into at least two components. One, the over $250,000 would be carved out from the general school override. And we may decide to carve out the so-called SRO from that as well. So there might be 3 school overrides, but there probably would be at least 2. The SRO, the OBRA, and the remainder of that, from the 559 plus 107, whatever we just said a minute ago. And let the, since we didn't get a really good explanation last Tuesday's, whatever it was, meeting from the finance person about how we came up with that. And there's some controversy between the town of Hamilton and the schools. I'd like to have somebody from the schools tell our constituents, our people in Wenham, why they came up with 250. It's not just the 250, it's 250 this year, $500,000 next year, $750,000 the year after, $1 million the year after that. That's a lot of money. And that, and if it fails, obviously, there's gonna be no teachers laid off, no school books not purchased. There's not gonna be any diminution of services to the town of Wenham and Hamilton as well, if it doesn't pass. Educational services, it's just, and so, unlike other overrides where they can say, we can't fund this, we have to cut in the English, Latin, if they still do that, French, whatever. So that we're considering that, and we haven't voted on that yet, but I'm just letting you know, in the spirit of communication, that most likely that we're gonna come down on that side and divide them up, and because one of the overrides would obviously affect their ability to fund the school traditional operating expenses, where what I just described won't affect the school operating expenses.
But if we cut 100, they cut another 200. Hamilton, right?
Well, if we cut 100, the school cuts 300. Is that where you're going with it?
Yeah.
If the budget
Yeah.
fails,
Yeah.
right?
It's
It's 3X.
three.
Right.
I'm talking about our portion of the 250.
Yeah.
Right.
It would be,
Yeah.
it would be $89,000 and
Right,
change.
right.
So then, I was thinking about that, and I think, agree with the concept. I was thinking of the nuances of how that works. So our warrant article couldn't identify an override for an SRO or
No.
OPEB, because we
Be the
can't tell them.
Be the
It would
amount.
just be an
Right.
amount,
Right.
and then
Right.
we'd
But
identify, we would discuss.
On the town floor,
right.
we would, on the warrant hearing, we would, what's this 89,000? Well, I'll
Right.
tell you what,
Right.
this is what it is.
And if any of that failed, whether it be, let me see if, am I, is
It
this
still
a
would be
true
up to
statement?
school to decide whether or not
Well-
to cut that or cut other
Well,
expenses.
but I guess where I'm going with that is if we had ended up with 2 overrides for the schools, just hypothetically, if either of those failed in Wenham, there isn't one in Hamilton,
Right.
I think the net effect is that the school district doesn't have a budget, correct?
Correct,
Right.
correct.
That's right.
So
So
that
then
triggers the whole, they have to
process.
go back and reduce the
It doesn't mean that
budget.
it doesn't, yeah, exactly.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it's cut and they have to figure it out within their budget one way or other, it means it presses the reset
Fail
button.
Right.
Yeah.
And
But
we've
by
got
segregating it out, we can at least tell people why we segregate it out and what the effect would be on the educational opportunities.
Yes,
for
oh, that's all true. I'm just trying to
just,
play out how it
arbitrarily
looks.
saying, screw you, we'll just cut to
Right.
I think to Jack's point, if you talk about it's $90,000 this year, but then it's $90,000 next year and the following year and the following year, that $90,000.
180 the following year, and then,
I mean, we had an aberrationally actually high increase in our levy limit from 19 to 20.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, it's about $400,000 or $500,000.
And,
So 20%, give or take, of our new levy capacity for the next 5 fiscal years is gone off the top just to fund the increase in the school's OPEB contribution.
There's no question that has to.
That's
In
a,
fact,
We
Yeah,
need to
I
fund
totally
that
agree.
eventually.
Peter, that one only lasts for a couple of years, because the 90,000 goes to 180, goes to, so
well, no,
on.
but the difference, the delta year to year is what I'm saying. So it's a $250,000, it's a $90,000 increase to Wenham every year.
For
Right.
3 or
So
4
it's-
years.
So
Okay.
same as the
All right.
increased levy capacity. So it's taking up 20% plus or minus of our new levy capacity every year for the next 5 fiscal years.
But we have to fund that.
Well,
We do eventually,
Yeah.
we've taken a more conservative approach. We've increased it $10,000 a year. They could start it at, their OPEB liability is,
They claim it's 34 million.
34 million?
We were all there, you were
Yeah,
there. The school claims it's 34 million, Hamilton thinks the school over is 47 million, so I don't know
Yeah, no, that's
why
interesting.
they're off so much
it's
money.
not, so it's not a good position to be in.
No, I get it.
so they could take the position to fund it at $100,000 this year, $200,000 next year.
Right.
You're not gonna realistically fund your way out of it until and unless
Right.
your pension liabilities are fully met and drop off.
Yeah, it's like
and then
30
you back-
years, 25, 30 years.
Right,
Yeah.
so
Which-
whatever
Interest
amount,
rates are gonna have to rise dramatically, rise to the pre-normal levels, I'll call it.
what the bond rating agencies wanna
Liabilities.
see, as was discussed at the meeting, is that, and as we've talked about, is they wanna see a policy in place and they wanna see you following the policy. They're not gonna be prescriptive and say they wanna see it funded at a certain level. So it's not as if we're underfunding our contribution and they're overfunding. They just wanna see something that everybody agrees on, that there's a policy in place and that it's adhered to year over year.
I think it is gonna be hard for residents, for taxpayers to think about this in a multi-year context, and the fact that the rate of funding increases dramatically. And exactly what you said about our future levy increase from new growth, it's shot, basically. So fiscally, I agree with what you said, David, that it's not a good position to be in. We need to fund it, we need to address it, both for the bond rating agencies, it's the right thing to do financially. Hamilton has been pounding the table for a long time, they wanna see some contribution, right? They're in a different financial situation than we're in. When the one thing I'll add is, last night, Jim, you were there, and for anyone else who watched, the school committee basically, they toyed with, well, what if we cut OPEB in half, just rather arbitrarily. I don't think they're thinking about the long-term funding schedule. They're just saying, well, would that help? It's almost like they're looking for our support, when it's not our role to support or not support their budget. It becomes a line item on ours, and then we support our budget or does support, right? So I think from that standpoint, they're looking at it as a small amount. They're saying, oh, well, it's only 27 grand for Wenham, but of course it's, on the SRO side, it's what is it, 87 for OPEB? And it's really much more than that in the grand scheme of things. It's not affordable to the town of Wenham at that rate, basically.
Right.
Given the situation that we're in, it only impede our way out of this situation with that schedule. That's why I basically stated, look, this is technically the right thing to do, doesn't make it affordable.
Right.
And toying with cutting in half or taking it out or whatever, just kind of last minute, oh, what if we did this? That doesn't change the elephant, which is the level what's over half our budget now, at 10 million plus, at 7% a year, or 5% a year, to be fair, if you take the apportionment out. That is what has put us in this position, which I think is why you've chosen to call it a school override, despite the fact that there's commingled elements, to your point, Jim, of 100 grand or whatever, in that above town level services.
Yeah.
But we couldn't afford the school operating budget anyway, right, in full. So it's kind of, it's kind of irrelevant, but there will be continual focus on the billing of it as a school override. That goes without saying. I mean, we saw plenty of evidence of that, so.
Right, and I think, to Jim's point, we lose a little bit, and I'm not suggesting that we change anything, but we lose a little bit of that, of our very clear rationale when we could say we're not even really funding level services in this budget at what we were before tonight, under our levy limit. And so we're putting whatever else we can into the schools. That's sort of a clean and hard to argue with. It's a little easier to argue with. Well, wait a minute, this is, they just added $100,000.
Oh, yeah.
They're now, above level services, and they're forcing us to pay.
I think probably, though, when you look at this list and you look at the items that were added in there, the only thing that's above level services is adding 3 hours a week in the finance office. I mean, in terms of really being above level services,
Well, that's how we have to start communicating it then, because it's really not
So
where we're.
let's just very quickly run down the list of things that are scratched, which is the facilities support staff position at 24,000 is no. Full-time police officer from net, 21,000. Emergency management coordinator, no at 6,250, 50,000 for the DPW. Stipends for Board of Assessors at 5,400, 10,000 for tree planting. I know it's funny.
Sorry.
The backhoe at 40,000 for the first year. Computers for police cruisers at 24,000, 5,000 off of roadway capital, 21,000 for our council on aging roof, 3,000 for carpet replacement, same place. I mean, that's just.
It's pretty, it's
That's
pretty.
an extensive list of things that we have
Impressive list
said
of-
no
Yeah.
to directly,
That are not
generally speaking.
frivolous.
I think we should write that up and for the warrant hearing and the town meeting, tell everybody what was.
That's why I just
We're not
stated it for the
funding, yeah.
record.
I think
But
it's-
yeah,
it's a very
Piece of
good
paper
point,
that,
Alex.
basically, you can read from it, or somebody can read from it, that,
yeah,
here are the things that we wanted to do, but didn't think we could afford.
that's right, that's right.
So
And
let
not
people know
even,
that-
There's a lot out there.
and not wish list
There's
things.
a lot out there in terms of future expenses for the community.
These are not aspirational, yeah.
And oh, by the way, we're still using $700,000 of free cash. I
That's-
hate to
that's-
beat the
That's the
drum,
most,
but we're using one-time money to balance this budget,
Yep.
and yet still are leaving all these things on the table.
Yep.
And still need a significant operating overhead. So do we want to talk about the special purpose stabilization fund?
So I'm fine either way. I did put thoughts together on some paper and put a quick memo together that I just emailed to you now, because I did it on the train. If you want, but I don't know if you could, it's
Do you want me
in
to
the
go
form of a
print it
memo to BOS, but we don't have to,
It's 9:00.
it's 9 o'clock. I mean, we can,
well, can you send it
maybe,
to us?
maybe we can just email it around. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that on this
And
or
I-
something else? Is that on the,
No, I didn't. I just sent it to Patty.
It's
so,
relative to the special purpose
Yeah,
stabilization fund.
I want to get everyone's thoughts. I think that, as Peter pointed out, Mike and David have both made great points about, like, do we need to take some steps here to kind of, so take a hard look at some tough decisions that might help us out in the near term. And I think that personally, the way I view it is I need to learn more about it. I need to hear. We haven't deliberated about it publicly at all.
yeah.
So I'm very curious to hear where the rest of FinCom is at. But I do think that it's, the notion of a special purpose stabilization fund for the enrollment shift alone, for that component that will be funded on a discretionary basis, is compelling, in that it gives us short-term, it alleviates that kind of, some of the pain, certainly not all of it, when we are faced with the enrollment shift moving against us, as we know it can and will at times. Very difficult to predict, great degree of uncertainty, not something that you want to sign up for, forever to fund it at a specific amount, but you fund it. $177,000 this year is the amount of the school increase attributed to that alone. If we were to hypothetically fund that via town override, yes, painful, yes, raises the tax rate, complicated, requires explanation and support, but could then next year or any following year help offset the negative impact of that apportionment formula. And that purpose only is the way I see it. So it's, in some ways it feels like it's, oh, well, you just put money aside for a rainy day. Yeah, you are, but it gives you the levy capacity for things like capital, for things like the level services alone, and it's not a permanent increase in the levy, right? We don't fund it, it
Yeah,
doesn't.
so do you want me, because I did go through a little bit more, just let me,
Yeah, give us
very
the,
quick,
please.
having gone through what the DLS has provided in terms of IGR and so forth. So to Alex's point, it's what would have to happen at town meeting this year if we were to move forward. There would be an article that would create the special purpose stabilization fund specifically for that purpose, for the school enrollment shift, and there would be an appropriation to that fund. Then, once created and that initial appropriation was made, in future fiscal years, it could go, the amount of the, along with the creation of the stabilization fund, there'd be an operating override that would then fund the appropriation to go into the
I
stabilization.
think that's an important point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is.
Yeah, then, but it's a unique operating override in how it's structured, in that the following year, it could increase by 2.5%, or it could be skipped entirely, or it could be reduced. If it's reduced,
What, you mean it reduce what's in the fund?
no,
No.
the amount of the operating
Got it,
override.
yeah.
Appropriation. If it's reduced, then that new number, call it $100,000, could only be increased the next year by 2.5%.
Mhm.
Oh, that's right.
So once you go back, you can't then jump up to, $200,000.
It's part of your normal levy
Yep.
And
limit.
it doesn't ever go to the ballot, nor does it go back to town meeting after the first year. It is a majority vote by the Board of Selectmen in terms of what the amount is for the appropriation of that operating override for that purpose. And again, that money is earmarked, it can't be spent on anything else, it has to go for that purpose.
But, hang on, but then if you did that, then is the Board of Selectmen then raising or have agreed to raise your tax rate?
Yeah, so.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
it raises the tax rate.
No. There was a fine point. The tax rate is approved by the town.
No,
Town meeting
No.
agrees.
no.
No, you're right. I'm sorry. I was wrong.
They approve the
Yep.
budget,
They
and
Right.
They approved the
Right.
budget.
Gotcha.
back into the tax rate.
Right.
So
Okay.
I have two questions.
That's fine.
Yep,
So is there a statutory limit of what we can make that amount?
no.
And the second one is, can we word it broadly to say just a school budget instead of a school population?
We can have it structured however we
Right.
want, but I think that for this purpose, it couldn't just be for an operating budget. It couldn't be for the school operating budget. It would have to
Because-
be for school, it's a special purpose stabilization fund.
Okay.
So it's,
got it.
because otherwise you could just say it's a town
Yeah.
operating override, except it's not.
Okay.
So it has to be there has to be funds set aside in this stabilization fund that would then be appropriated for that purpose.
And we have
And
the,
then, I'm sorry.
sorry, one more.
Okay.
We
You
have
said
the-
two.
Yeah, I did, didn't I? Okay.
No, go ahead, I'm kidding.
We,
I'm just gonna write down.
we have the
what I
data
forget.
from the past years to come up with a pretty good number where we feel comfortable with, the enrollment shift, right?
Well,
Because we have the
so-
graph.
Yeah, so we know that historically,
Yeah.
it's actually been on the order of $300,000 to $350,000. We're kind of on the downswing right
Yeah.
now. It's projected to decrease more next year. But again, if, let's say it was $177,000 this year, and I'll actually circle back to that in a minute, because I don't
Okay.
think it can be. Then that amount would be raised and appropriated next year. We'd need it, because that's gonna cover this year's enrollment shift next year. So then the question is really what additional amount we need for the following year. I'd have to check with DOR. Patty and I talked about this a bit today. I had to check with DOR, I have to check with legal. The tricky thing here is that we've only appropriated, before we get into the $107,000 we added into the budget tonight, we've only appropriated $135,000 of school funding in our Article 1 budget. So I think,
Of additional school funding.
right, so I think we could only
Sure.
offset 135,000
Right,
of that cost into this special purpose stabilization fund and operating override, because we don't actually have the $177,000 that the school enrollment shift
right,
costs
in our budget.
Yep.
Right,
So I think that's how it would work.
If we had it this year, you're saying, if we had a balance this year to use,
Yeah.
not the appropriation to it, but the use of it? No, sorry. You're saying it could only be funded hypothetically this year?
At
At
135.
Can't go higher than them.
Yeah.
You can't go
Yeah,
higher than the
yeah,
amount
yeah.
that we've included in the
That,
budget.
that makes perfect sense.
then
Yeah.
if it went to
Explain that
135
to
would
the public.
technically
Yes.
mean that all of the school funding is in some sort of an override.
Correct.
Yeah.
Either this special stabilization fund override or a school operating override.
Yeah.
Correct.
And nothing of the school budget is in,
It would also have that net effect.
okay.
And
I'm sorry,
the
can
other
you
thing,
make that?
Everything is an override.
So if,
Basically, everything might be an override.
right, if we're
Okay.
saying we'd put 135,000,
Yeah.
which is what we have in our budget right now,
Right.
into this, then we have nothing in our budget for the schools. It's all
Oh, we have to do it
in an
twice?
override. Whether it's this override or the school override, there's nothing in the levy limit budget. Because the
It's-
purpose of that is to, to
This is
increase
above and
the.
beyond, this is a net increase,
that-
right?
No, but in the
Sorry.
example for this particular year,
Yeah.
everything would be in an override. If we had
And it would
already
free up
established-
135,000
If we had
under the
already
levy.
established it.
correct, but I think on the flip side, you have
Yeah.
to
Just
think
this
back to
particular
our
year.
discussion earlier tonight. What we've chosen instead to do is fund $28,000 of the school budget in our Article 1.
Right,
Right.
So we're talking about the difference of $28,000.
right.
I mean, really.
Right.
It's
So for that
nominal.
amount, it's, yeah.
I mean, I think anybody would argue that's a token amount,
Mhm.
kind of,
Uh,
$0 or $28,000 is.
But if you,
So what are you saying? That we should do it or shouldn't do it for $28,000?
Well, no,
I'm-
I,
Are you saying people will think, oh, $28,000, no big deal, let's do it? Or they'll say, why are they putting this in an override?
no, I'm
For
looking at it from
28.
the school's perspective and saying, that, making the argument that $28,000 in our Article 1 budget
It's de minimis.
is de minimis. We're basically saying the entire school budget is in an operating
Right.
budget anyways.
The entire increase
Oh, I see
year
what
over
you're
year
saying.
of the school budget.
and if we approve,
Increase, yeah, we need,
Yeah,
we need to keep
people are really
harping on
starting
the
to think that
increase,
we're
'cause
not, that we're not
$10
paying, we're
million
only giving them 135
versus-
In
grand.
fact, they owe us some money.
Yeah.
Stated repeatedly last night, a
and
little
if
bit
we,
alarming.
if the override passes though, doesn't that carry over to
Yes.
increase the stabilization fund appropriation for the next year?
Yes,
Okay, so if we do whatever, 175,000,
yeah, call it
then that can,
130.
then we can do an appropriation in '21 for 175,000, the way this
Yes.
is structured, right?
2% more than the
No,
2.5%.
2.5%
more than we do
2.5%
this year.
more
Right.
than what we do this year.
So most we
Oh.
can go year over year. So do we know for sure, and this is going to be my question, that an enrollment shift fund or an enrollment shift is eligible to be a special purpose?
I was gonna ask the same, I was gonna,
You know,
in reading this, it doesn't.
Yeah, and
all the
reading this, they talk
examples-
about some kind of concrete things,
Yeah.
fire trucks and
Sure, they do.
debt.
Yeah.
So enrollment shift is a little nebulous. Does the DOR allow that? Will they allow that?
To the extent it's quantifiable, I would hope that they would, but I agree with you. It sounds
should
like a
be-
question
just be
for
sure.
Lauren and the company.
Yeah.
I mean,
We wouldn't want to, conceptually, it might
State
sound
has to
great,
rule on that, that's for sure.
but I think we
More
would
than
just
take-
want to be
take the,
sure.
Oh, yeah,
Wait,
give a
yeah.
private ruling or whatever.
Yeah,
Something.
Yeah, something on paper.
The
right.
state has to say,
Yeah.
okay, otherwise we're deep.
yeah.
Yeah,
And-
Well, yeah, we wouldn't.
In reading this, it
not,
sounds
You know
like
what
there's
I'm talking about.
more,
Yeah.
So this actually is important, depending upon whether the school succeeds or doesn't succeed in funding their over at $250,000 a year. This becomes very important, I think, in the future, because this is gonna be part of the school budget, even though it's not directly the enrollment shift.
well, I think this
Hello?
would
Yeah.
only be for the enrollment
It would
shift.
just be for the enrollment.
I know,
Yeah.
I know.
so it would only address, so neither the schools nor the town of Wenham or Hamilton for that matter, have any control over the apportionment formula, right?
It's in the, right.
It's completely unpredictable and no one can, I mean, indirectly.
The formula's not unpredictable, the result of the formula is.
The resulting
Right,
apportionment split is unpredictable.
Yes.
And they control their budget, we control our budget, X theirs, because we accept it and adopt it as a line item. So the way I look at it is, it's not really taking from the school's budget at any point in time, it's helping the town afford their school's budget
Yep.
when they present it to us, given that we have no say in what their budget is, ultimately.
But it
And
ultimately increases their town's tax rate for that year,
It does so for that year, yep.
more
Yep.
than if we didn't, if we incorporated this.
So
into
that's
the-
very
Correct.
fair. You know, the
Correct.
formula is fair, we have more students, we have
Right.
more money.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
that's,
Hard to argue with that.
absolutely, that's fair, yeah.
Catherine, getting back to the tax rate issue, so
Or the tax bill,
Tax
rate,
bill.
tax bill, whatever.
if you, it seems to me that you're gonna have that tax bill just continue on into the future.
Well, I think it
Or
would
does it
vary.
depend on the amount of appropriation
Yeah.
into the fund itself?
Well, I think,
So how does that,
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
how does that
I
work?
thought it was discretionary funding every year, but that's shows,
Well, it would, but
so it's
But you
either,
gotta-
you either keep it at the same number,
yep,
it, it increases 2.5%, you cut it down to a different number, or you don't fund it. You can skip a year.
yeah,
right.
yeah.
But in the year that you skip, in a year that you skip, your levy limit goes back to what it
Yes.
was
Yep.
before you had it.
So the idea would be,
Only for the year
if
before.
you fast forward 5 years, and we're on the positive side of a massive enrollment shift
Right,
up in Hamilton,
yep,
then all
Bank
of a
a
sudden we have this levy capacity like Hamilton has had,
right,
and we say, okay, either it goes away, or we, for a couple of years, take some capacity,
Yep.
chunk it away into the stabilization fund,
knowing that it'll tide, it'll turn
knowing that
eventually.
eventually it'll
Yep.
roll back at us, and that way we'll have some way to hedge against it and not be in the same position that we are today.
So the tax rate can be, the mitigation of the tax rate can go back to where it was.
Mitigate the future tax rate.
Right.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
year by year, because
Yes.
it's not,
So it's not
It's
permanent
not a permanent
tax
Not a
rate.
permanent
No.
tax.
Not
Depends
permanently.
on the
Levy increase.
appropriation, and if you don't appropriate for 2 years, it goes back to the first year appropriation amount, or does it go
Net
away
just
entirely?
X out
It
there.
would drop back off.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
so could you also send us, I know we have this somewhere, the projection for the enrollment?
Sure.
Because if we're flat, if the next year, 10 years are projected to be flat, it could be less useful than a flat-ish.
I don't know that going out that far,
Well, 5 years.
5 years. I
Because
think.
10 years is, they do
Right.
project to that, but who,
but Peter, you raised a good point in your kind of suggesting how it would play out. This isn't the time that you want to fund this thing, this is the time you want to use it, the
Yeah.
past 5 years.
Right,
So I
right.
readily admit that
Right,
this, you want it, in the
that's-
salad years, you want to fund it.
Yeah.
Right.
This is
And then-
still hand to mouth and
Yeah.
not really giving us any relief at all. It's
No.
just shifting it.
Absolutely true.
But it's
Yeah.
at least
Affects the
carving it
tax
out
rate.
separately,
Does,
and
yeah.
it sets us up 5-10 years down the line to be in a better position to
Right.
weather those storms.
yeah.
And so if we didn't pursue it this year, because admittedly, we're not in a position to help ourselves to it, we should, again, I think it's still something to consider, but we should consider it for those years in which the apportionment formula works in our favor and
Which is-
free up a
yeah.
little bit of capacity.
Which is why I wanted to remind myself what this looked like, because to your
Very
point,
imaginative, Peter, very good, it's very interesting.
yeah, it is
Agreed.
interesting.
Explaining would be even more difficult.
Yeah.
You need some examples of this, over 5 years. Or
They do have, in the IGRs, they do a couple scenarios, very basic, that kind of runs through
Is
if
this the
you.
email you were talking about?
No, no,
No,
it's
this was in
actually,
our
it's in
packet,
the
the
packet.
DLS.
The DLS,
Oh, all right.
those two scenarios, it does kind of walk you through.
Make that tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
There was an item talking about potentially,
Mike's are on.
Good. Well, on top of the information.
Potentially,
yeah, so potentially going through warrant articles and getting some discussion and votes on recommendations for finance committee, that's.
Has anyone ever done this?
Yeah, and when we'll say we've got all this.
Yes, so it's
Any town,
generally used for capital
Right.
stabilization. That's what it's, that's,
Right, so it's probably designed
by the way,
for.
we have a stabilization fund, everybody knows that,
The
right?
general one.
yes,
General,
yeah.
yeah.
They've been around for, this particular
We haven't-
option has been around for
We
about
haven't
15 years.
accessed it in years, but,
Do we need to?
Well, we've counted it towards our reserves,
Always rotates.
and that's all we've done. Counted it in our reserves for,
Do we need to tap it now?
do we need to?
Tap that stabilization fund now in our position?
It leaves us in the same exact position for FY '21, right? If
Yeah.
stabilization is really meant for a one-time emergency situation that you know you're not gonna be in again.
yeah, we forgot to insure our fire truck and went off the cliff. We need,
Right.
spend
But we
$500,000
didn't build
for a
that,
fire truck.
Or burned up in the fire station like that.
We don't have any insurance.
And then the
Yeah, and-
5-year projections, Peter, need the new
Yeah,
new housing projects that are
just
coming online, right?
total, in the fire
In
station.
the firehouse.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
funny.
Yeah.
No, it's.
Peter?
No.
I'm done, when you're done.
And, yeah, and
The
some
5-year
of the
projections
firefighters were
have to
injured,
take
not
the
badly,
new
but
housing
Had to close
projects
Stroke
that
inhalation
are most likely coming online. right?
Alphabet.
so,
We're gonna add more enrollment shift to us, probably, I would think.
Which is why the enrollment shift projections
Don't
don't
work
take those
that way.
individual projects into account. They're looking at demographic trends. They're not looking
That
at,
project
this
trends.
project is in the pipeline, therefore X amount of kids are gonna be in the school system in 2 or 3 years.
they're not even really looking, and this has been my sort of bone of contention all along, they're not even really looking at the 2 and 3-year-olds, families with 2 and 3-year-olds who have just moved into town.
Yeah.
They look at live births, they look at, general trends, but, I've used this example a lot of times. I go to church and, wow, there are a lot of little kids there. And I'm pretty sure those little kids, 2 and 3-year-olds, are not probably counted in these projections. Yeah, it is.
And Spring Hill's gonna have 1.5 kids per family, probably.
Right, and it's very hard to predict. When Parsons Hill was built, I think we predicted 60 kids from that, which I don't even know how that number came about, because I think there are at least 60 houses there, and they're all 4 or 5 bedrooms. And there were way more than 60 kids. So it's a very hard thing to predict
Well,
relative to
My
developments.
neighborhood's a lot of people my age, and we're moving out and going to wherever, and that,
Wherever,
people moving-
hopefully someplace better,
Are they
like,
still alive?
still alive. They're not dying yet.
No, they're not
No,
dying.
moving, not
they're
dying.
going to.
And who's gonna buy your house?
And that the people who are moving in are people in their 30s and 40s with 2 kids.
Right, and they're probably little kids.
So in the
They're little
spirit,
kids, that's 30s
Right.
and 40s, they would be little kids. They're not
Well, it depends.
I know we aren't discussing this, but is
not
this,
sexually active at 15.
Well, no, but my
We're
daughter,
doing
when she's
conversation.
40, she's gonna have an 18-year-old. So,
what was the question?
Are we doing the warrant or
No.
are we?
No.
925.
no,
I would like to end, for me, in saying, we're scrutinizing every dollar here,
Yeah.
which I think is worthwhile, but I think it's worth looking everywhere, which we maybe haven't looked at in the past. I'm not sure the history of payment in lieu of taxes from organizations that don't pay, like Gordon College. I know we got a police cruiser a few years ago, but I don't think that's a consistent situation.
We have put the pitch in for the fact that we're running a fire-based EMS program, and there are a fair amount of calls that go out to Gordon.
right.
And so when it comes time for a new ambulance, I'd like to think that they could do a similar thing. That's something on the order of $75,000 to $100,000. But
But
it's been long discussed and
Yeah.
well before my time.
And discussed not amongst ourselves, but with Gordon and officials, and we get the same answer.
You need a
Year after year.
multi-year effort to do that.
Right.
Because,
Is there a multi-year effort?
Well, there has been in the past, and it always comes down to, well, it's our discretion, and we really don't have the money.
that's why I said it's multi-year.
Right.
My understanding, and hopefully I'm not talking out of school, but they're talking at a potential 10% cut across the board in Gordon for next fiscal year.
Oh, that's so good.
So I don't know that now, and you look at what's going on, I'm not saying this at all is the case with Gordon, but, it's a difficult
yeah.
environment
Right,
for
like
higher,
other
for
small
secondary at
colleges,
this
yeah.
point. So I
don't know that there's gonna be much of a response. if
They
it's
do
out.
pay for every
Yeah.
fire call.
Well, they
right?
have, there's a fee, right? They don't completely cover the cost of the fire, of the calls.
They do.
They completely-
They cover the full staff response,
Okay.
and there is an equipment charge as well
Oh, okay.
that covers the full cost of our responders.
But
Yeah.
it's not
Okay.
Boston, it's not the plan that
No.
Menino rolled out about 6 years ago.
Well, and I think a fair question to ask on that is, are we charging tax, or are they paying tax, real estate tax, on everything that they should be? Do
Right.
they have some private businesses
Yes.
there?
PT.
That's the PT, the other things that they are actually, are for-profit?
Yep.
And are we comfortable that we're getting all the taxes that we should be getting?
And I know that is a conversation that I've had with the assessors
Right.
relative to that
that-
particular issue.
Right, so I think to your point, that's an easier, not easier, but
Lower
a
hanging
lower,
fruit,
yeah.
yeah.
'Cause
It's a lot cleaner.
Yeah, and that's not a donation, that's a law, legally they are supposed. So if I had Jack here, by the
I
time,
think we have to adjourn to technically,
That's a great idea,
I'll
Mike.
have someone here
Is there
to
a
second.
second?
Everybody's packing up.
Worms.
Is there a
I
second?
heard a second.
Second.
I want
Not yet.
to
All in favor?
formula now.
And guess what? You can't adjourn. You got to stay.
we'll see you at about midnight, Catherine.
I think he's coming
Hopefully still in
back.
That'll be a joint Board of Selectmen.
There is the order of necessity, right?
Yeah, right,
Just a
that's
quick
true. I'll give him
informal-
another 3 minutes and then I'm gonna.
Formal question, though, is this about the number of articles that we're
No,
projecting?
the financial articles, you can 2X.